Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, live from Israel with Rabbi Chaim Coffman. Always a joy to be with Rabbi Coffman and hear Torah shining out of the nation of Israel, even when they've been under fire and all kinds of stuff. They're still sharing Torah to the nations, and it's just a joy to be a part of it. I've had such a rough week myself. I'm so looking forward to this class. Let's just jump right in and see how the rabbi's doing. Now, this is a little bit later than normal. Hi, Rabbi. How you doing today? It's a little later because of sunset there in Israel, correct?
That is correct. So for the next number of weeks, we're going to be a little bit later. Just gives me a little bit of peace of mind, so to speak, so I don't have to finish Shabbos and just jump in. I could actually do it straight away, but even for me, that's a little bit much. So, like I would say, it's probably a little bit above my pay grade, but that's, that's kind of the way it is. So we are, it's good that hopefully there will be a ceasefire here. Things will be quiet. We'll see. You never know. It's always exciting times in the Middle East. The world itself is a powder keg, right? Ready to explode at any time. So, hopefully it'll be quiet for a while. Even though a friend of mine said, well, let this be the beginning of the end, Zechariah chapter 14. So let it just, play out. So we also want to survive. That is definitely true. But in any case, certainly, we do pray for peace. There's no question about that. And it's unnerving, in many different ways, certainly to live under fire, right? That pretty much goes without saying, even though I think a good part of the world doesn't really care. They don't look at the facts and, all that. But we're not going to get into politics, right? So we are in the second chapter, 6th Mishnah. This has actually made a mistake last week. It said it was, part 3 was really actually part 4, which this week means we're in part 5. Which we may continue to part. We're definitely going to get to part 6, most likely to part 7 as well. I mean, I don't know if we get to 10 or 11, 12. We'll see. It depends how much I talk, how much I get through, and, that's all part of the game. So
how much I interrupt you?
You'll sure interrupt me. I mean, maybe not as much as William Hall, but I have no doubts. Right? We have no doubts over here, but it's good because, when we need to, get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, and analyze, what I've said, or maybe it's not clear, that's very good, right? Because that leads to other discussions and, people want to hear, does it apply to this? Doesn't apply to that, et cetera. So, questions are always good. And certainly classes like this, especially my class I'm going to give tomorrow in the book of Leviticus at 9 a.m. Eastern time, I always don't care how much, ground I cover, because I cover all kinds of different things, within the verses and going deeper in the verses, what they mean for us today. So over the last 7-8 years, I started from the book of Genesis. I'm holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 14, right? So it shows I haven't really gone, that far. The last 2 weeks, I didn't give a class last week because it was before Shavuos, but the week before and the week before that, I think I covered one verse in 2 hours or more. And I can guarantee tomorrow, just as a prelude, we're probably only going to cover one verse. There's just, quite a bit to speak about there. So in any case, we're still talking about the fact that a boor cannot be fearful of sin because he doesn't know what to be fearful of. And he's different from an unlearned person, right? An unlearned person cannot be scrupulously pious, right? That's where we're still holding the first part of the Mishnah. We might actually get to the second part of the Mishnah. I mean, I should say might, because I'm not exactly sure. See where this goes. Comes along Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld of blessed memory. He was a great rabbi in the last generation, lived in the old city of Jerusalem when really Jerusalem was only the old city before 1967, etc. So Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld would fight parents who sent their children to schools that were not religious, right? There's a verse against them that we say in the Shema. We say in the Shema that every day they give false testimony on themselves, right? The rabbis tell us, anyone wants to look it up, it's Brachot chapter 14b, right? 14b, that whoever says the Shema without tefillin, without phylacteries, whatever phylacteries are, they are giving false testimony. So what's the connection? You'll say a person who says the Shema, right? If he says the Shema, a man, obviously, because a woman does not have an obligation to wear tefillin or certainly to wear tzitzis. The reason is really now today they're considered a male garment, without getting into all this about feminism and everything else. But the idea is they are exempt, women are exempt in Judaism from mitzvahs that are bound by time, right? So that being the case, they have an obligation to pray, right? Everybody has an obligation to pray, men 3 times a day, right, with 10 other men. Women don't have an obligation to pray with 10 men. Again, they are exempt from mitzvahs that are bound by time, right? But there's an obligation, right? There's still an obligation, either once a day, twice a day, for them to pray. The irony is that according to the Rambam and others, the mitzvah to pray, we'll stay on this for a second, the mitzvah to pray is a Torah obligation. What I say, when I say, how I say it, all the prayer services and all that, that's all according to the rabbis, right? The obligation to pray, everyone agrees. Everyone agrees it's a Torah obligation to pray, right? The question is, okay, what do I say? When do I say it? In prayer, as I gave a class early Friday, that prayer is something that always needs to be strengthened, right? Imagine someone comes out of Christianity, they come out of paganism, they say, oh, I want to convert, right? We'll forget about Noahide for a second. They say they want to convert. What is one of the hardest things for them to do besides moving to a Jewish community? And that is praying. Because you should pray in Hebrew. And there are a lot of different reasons why you should pray in Hebrew, right? Wow. But at the end of the day, they go to a prayer service, they're lost, right? They're 100% lost. They walk into a synagogue, they don't know what's up, what's down, they stand, they sit, they this, they that, and it takes a while. It takes a while to get comfortable in the synagogue. It takes a while to understand, at least at a basic level, what the prayers mean. And probably, I would say, the most frustrating thing for a person in the process of conversion, other than moving. Moving is probably the hardest thing for someone to do, to move to a Jewish community. But I think prayer and praying in Hebrew, or at least following the service, which is the obligation when it comes to prayer in general, that a rabbinical court wants to see, is that you know how to read from a prayer book, right? You know how to read after blessings, before blessings. You know how to follow a prayer service. I get the question a lot. People say, do I have to know written, spoken Hebrew? No. Right? You don't have to know how to speak Hebrew like an Israeli. A rabbinical court's not going to care about that. They want to know, can you follow a prayer service? Can you read grace after meals, right? Can you keep a certain pace, etc. That's what they want to see. Now, when a person comes to synagogue, especially the first time, they're lost. Second time, they're lost. Third time, they're also lost, but it's less, right? It takes a long time, for a person to get comfortable, in the synagogue. And imagine, they've gone to prayer services their whole lives, in the language that they understand, English, French, Spanish, wherever a person lives. Italian won't leave out the Italians, right? Canadians, because they speak English, right? Not British English, but whatever, right? We're not going to make fun of everybody here. But in general, they understand the language, right? They understand what they're doing, more or less, right? They bow here, they say this, they whatever, cross themselves when supposed to cross themselves. They come to a synagogue, they're lost, right? It's a very hard, it's a very hard thing. So, it says Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, one of the things that a parent's going to have to do when it comes to children is they're going to have to educate them in the Torah way, right? There is no such thing, right? There is no such thing as, educating them at home, right? That is not going to happen, right? That is certainly not going to happen. There is somewhat of a movement today that, there are parents who want to keep their kids at home, either have them learn privately or whatever. There are issues in schools. There are many issues in schools in general. But, if a person has kids to educate, they have to send them to a Jewish school. Right now, a lot of Jewish schools will not take kids before conversion. Some will, right? Some absolutely will. But in the end of the day, what does Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld there say? He's telling you that if you want to send your kids to a school, you have to send them to a school that has proper Torah values. If the kids do not get proper Torah values, they will not come out as religious Jews, right? I think that would be pretty obvious. Even if, let's say, they go to a Jewish school and they go to a top, Jewish school, yeshiva, girls' school, etc. Now, is that a guarantee the kids are going to come out okay? It's no guarantee, right? There is not a guarantee because, every family or a lot of families, have kids that go sour. Now you'll say, oh, see, there's a problem with the system, right? And the reality is that we've messed up things, i.e. human beings. Not everybody is a cookie cutter. Not everybody fits the same mold. Some people experience things, let's say, not necessarily through the mind, right? They see it through vision, through, they look at things in a different way. They have difficulty. Some people may have difficulty, sitting for so long, et cetera. I heard a great joke. Someone, great rabbi, whatever, said, I heard the other day, said, how many ADHD people does it take to screw in a lipo? You want to ride my bike? You want to play ball?
Squirrel.
Yeah.
We say that squirrel.
You want to throw a football?
Get distracted.
Yeah, they get distracted. Yeah, so not everyone has the ability, to sit and learn all day. I mean, I have a 9-year-old at home, right? Goes to school. What time does he finish? He finishes 4:45, right? He gets a little bit of math, a little bit of grammar, sort of, but most of the things he's learning, obviously, are Hebrew studies, right? He's gonna learn Tanakh, right? He's learning Tanakh. He's learning the prophets, the writings, right? He's going to learn Mishnah. He's going to start learning, Talmud next year. But whatever, it takes a long time, to learn this stuff. So next year, I asked him today, next year he gets out at 5 as a 10-year-old, right? As an 11-year-old will probably get out at 5:30, 5:45. Once he starts going to yeshiva, the age of 13 or 14, he won't get home unless he dorms, won't get home until 10 o'clock. It's a late day. So we would say, well, not everyone's, a cookie cutter over here. If you're into the learning, you're really good at it, et cetera, it's one thing. But what if you're a little bit slower, it takes you a longer time? You don't, you see things in a different way. Let's say visually, not necessarily, in a normal way. I mean, I'm saying it's not a normal way. People see things in different, in different ways. But we still have to educate because we want to produce the cream of the crop, right? Now, if you have a school where not everyone's the cream of the crop, you're not going to get necessarily so many students to go there, and the level is going to be low. So it's a catch-22, right? Because, a Rebbe, what's his job? He's got 35 students, let's say, and who should he be catering to? He's got to be catering to the top students, right? But what if someone's a little bit slower? What if someone, doesn't follow so well? They're going to be lost. Right, so you have to really cater to everyone. It's not easy, right? So, it's certainly not easy. And the standard of how we judge, fortunately or unfortunately, today in the Orthodox community is by scholarship, right? Is how much a person knows. Now, what happened? Not everyone has the ability, to sit and learn all day. Certainly not after marriage, because obviously, if the guy's not working, then his wife's going to have to, is going to have to pitch in. The parents, in-laws, if they can help, they're going to have to pitch in, right? But people claim and make the mistake. I think I spoke about this, last week or a few weeks back, this idea that the secular say, we have to share the burden in Israel. All these yeshiva students are way too many. They have to, they have to do the army, right? They have to share the burden. Now, statistically speaking, they don't really need ultra-Orthodox Jews in the army. And their goal is to break them down to make them like secular Jews, even though, the government and the army says it's not true. We just want them to share the burden. So there are separate units, for ultra-Orthodox Jews if a kid's not going to, if someone's not going to sit and learn, right? But the claim is there are tens of thousands, right, of people that duck the army. Now, not everyone who's 18 serves in the army. I think it's like 60% 65%. Others get an exemption either because, sickness or, other things, that they can't serve. But even so, what's their claim? It's a very hot issue spoken about on, controversial issues on Tanakh Talk, right? But what's the issue? Spoken about it different. I did it in my Q&A a few weeks ago. Spoke about it, but what's the real issue? Their issue is, the secular issue is, well, you know what? Not only you're not sharing the burden, why should my kid fight and potentially die? Why should your kid, get an exemption? So, the whole thing about morality and other things in the army, right? But their claim is there are so many people. The other claim is you get so many people sitting and learning, right? So, yeah, maybe you have tens of thousands. That is true. But the claim is, you have so many people sitting and learning. So only take the cream of the crop, right? Only take, let's say, a couple thousand. You let everyone else should do the army, right? That's their claim. Now, the problem is a number of things. One, forget about the morality issue. That's a major issue, right? But another issue is you have to remember what happened in the Holocaust. Holocaust destroyed the previous generation, right? Hitler, may he rot wherever he is, right? Hitler, what did he do? Who was the first people who tried to round up? The rabbis, right? The teachers. Now, anyone who's ever been to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, in Jerusalem, there's a kids exhibit, right? 1.5 million kids killed. Now, that absolutely boggles the mind. I can understand adults or whatever, killing so many kids. So you say, well, this person was irrational anyway. He just killed everybody. True, but he wasn't a fool, right? I'm not going to sit here and praise him, but he certainly wasn't a fool. Why did he kill so many kids? Because if you don't have Torah scholars to teach, you knock them off. You don't have kids to teach. You don't have a next generation, right? In other words, you killed off the teachers. You killed off the students. So what's the next generation going to look like? Zero. It's going to be a big zero. You're not going to have a next generation. So what's our claim? So our claim is that we're going to take everybody. In other words, we have to make up for that generation. You have to understand, that generation, every generation going back to Mount Sinai is 10, 15, 20 times greater than the next generation because they're closer, to the giving of Torah Mount Sinai. But their generation compared to the previous generation is also nothing. And their generation compared to the previous generation, right? Same thing. So if we've lost so many people, right? We've lost so many great people. We have to give them the opportunity, at least to see what they can develop into. You say, oh, look, this person's learned till he's 18, right? If he's learned till he's 18, let him get a real job. Let him go to college. You might have such a grueling schedule, 2 mornings and 2 afternoons a week. You might have to take basket weaving, a little bit of history. It might tax the mind, a little bit. And look at the well-rounded education he's getting. Yeah. I heard a great rabbi once say, let's send, if I see that you send, people to university, you send Orthodox Jews to university, and they come out more moral than they went in, he said, we'll have a discussion, right? But that doesn't exist, right? That doesn't exist. So back to the original question here, they're claiming there's so many people sitting and learning. So there's a discrepancy in Rashi that it talks when the Torah talks about the Levites serving in the temple. In one place, how old are they when they start? 25. In another place, it says, how old are they when they start serving? 30. Right? The Rashi says, I don't understand. It's either 25 or 30. It can't be both. Right? It's kind of the joke. What's Helen Keller's favorite color? Corduroy. All right, it's a bad joke. It's a bad joke, but it's like, it's 25 or 30. Right? How can it be both? So Rashi says, what does it mean? Rashi says, I have a 5-year difference. The 5-year difference is if someone's sitting and learning, you give them 5 years to see if they're going to be successful. In other words, if they're going to see something out of their learning. If within 5 years they don't really see anything out of their learning, okay, they're never going to see it. Right? But you got to give them an opportunity because their minds are only starting to develop at the age of 18. Right? It's really, that's when they start to develop in learning. Right? From the age of 18. So now the real question is, over the age, I think the statistic was over the age of 25, right? People who are married over the age of 25, how many are sitting learning full-time? Right? Now, the statistic I think is going to shock you. The biggest yeshiva in the world is the Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem, 4,000 students, 5,000 students. After that, I mean, you got married students, single students, etc. After that, you got Ponovich, right? Ponovich, another couple thousand, 2,000, 3,000. Let's say you're up to 8,000. Now you combine all the other yeshivas in the world. I don't think you're going to get past 15,000 if you're lucky, right? 15,000, 20,000, I'm saying over the age of 25. If you're talking about high schools, kids between the ages of, let's say, 14 and 18, okay, the number's much greater, right? But we're talking about over the age of 25 sitting and learning. So let's say, now this is a jump. This is a major jump over here. Let's say there are 50,000. And it's not 50,000. I don't even think it's close, right? Probably maybe 15,000 if you're lucky. But I'm going to be generous because I like you. I like this audience. I have a good time, right? So let's say it's 50,000. How many Jews exist in the world today? 14.5 million, give or take. Now, let's do the math. If you divide 50,000 by 14.5 million, what do you get? It's like 0.001. You're not even at 1%. You're at a quarter of 1%. A lot of people jumping up and down and screaming, look at all people sitting and learning. What are you talking about? It's not even a quarter of a percent of the Jewish people. It just looks like a lot of numbers, right? But the reality is it's only a quarter of a percent, if that. So the question isn't why there's so many people learning. The question is, what are we going to do to bolster the masses, right? That's the question. But you see, you can't use that argument on an Israeli parent, and they're going to say, but you still have to serve in the army, right? You still have an obligation, to share the burden. Because if you don't share the burden, why should my kid have to suffer? But the reality is, again, they don't, there were so many non-Jewish Russians that came to Israel. They don't need them, right? They don't really need them. And it's a whole pain in the neck. They have to pray. They have to coach your food, all these other things without getting into the issue of morality, right? So if you go back to education, if you're going to send your kids, you say, well, my kid went to Hebrew school. How can he intermarry? What do you mean? You have to understand education. We don't just send our kids to school and expect them to turn out fine, right? We have to be active in their education, right? Especially Jewish education. Now, if the parents don't believe, why is the kid going to keep it? Why is the kid going to want to do it? That doesn't make any sense, right? So the parent will say, do as I say, not as I do, right? But the parent is going to give a mixed message. So if the school itself is, let's say, half-baked, the kids at best will come out half-baked. So my Rebbe says, Mori v'Rebbe, Harav Agon, or Moshe Stern Moshlita should be well. He brings down a number of times, if you had a choice to send your child to a stronger school, they'll learn more. But the kids that go to the school, not so great, right? They don't come from such great families. They're weak in other areas. Or I could send my kid to a weaker school, but the kids all come from good families, right? So he says, what's better? For the kid to learn more, but potentially get influenced in the wrong way, or to learn less, but to have, a stronger community of friends and all that. So his answer was the latter, right? Which would make sense. Why? Because you want your kid to be around other kids that have similar values, right? Similar family values. If they have values that go against Torah, then what happens is your kid could, fall off the face of the earth. So someone told me many years ago, when your kid goes off to yeshiva, you pray that he has a good study partner, right? That's what you pray for, because that's where the most influence is, in general, because, they're out of the house, many hours during the day. But even if there's school before that, where are they going to learn the most from? At home, right? They're going to get the good example, God forbid the bad example. It's all going to stem from the house. The problem is, what happens if the kid gets in with bad friends, right? So it doesn't matter what the values of the house are because the pull of the street is much greater. But if the values are strong in general and the parents can give that over, now let's say the kid needs something that maybe a lot of kids wouldn't need. I had a daughter that needed to, run around and, play ball and all that. So when I was in New Jersey, they had a sports night for girls. They rented out a gym. For, girls different ages, and that was great. I have a son-in-law every few nights, he plays Frisbee, the whole group, plays Frisbee. So listen, this person's solid, learns 8, 9, 10 hours a day, gets exercise that way. If you don't do that, the kids go crazy, right? You need to give them an outlet. The problem is when it comes to sports and organized sports and all that represents. So here in Israel, they nip it in the bud. In the States, it's a little bit different, but here they nip it in the bud. They don't allow it. Why not? One very simple reason: they don't want to take time out of learning. But more importantly, what's the national game here? Is soccer, right? Football, as most people would call it. When are the football games here in Israel? Shabbos, right? So you're associating football with desecration of Shabbos, right? So therefore they nip it in the bud. But there are, there are kids that need to be out there running around.
Yeah.
It doesn't go against the fact that Torah is not important, right? But it has to be utilized in the right way. And I know, a friend of mine who was here for many years, and one of his sons needed that very badly, grew up in South Africa, and he needed it. He didn't get it. And it was looked down upon or whatever, and he got smashed all over the place. Now, again, coming from both worlds, I understand, an outlet. I was always, on the ball field, court, whatever, when I was a kid, as a teenager, et cetera. You take that away, you destroy people. How long can they sit there? How long, it's very hard, extremely hard. And if someone doesn't have that, they go crazy, right? They can go out of their mind because not everyone is gifted to be able to sit there, and enjoy the stories, enjoy, your mind expanding, thinking about these things and, all these different things. It's hard, it's very, very hard. But again, I do understand you do not want to look up to these athletes, right? These athletes are not the greatest athletes, to look up to. I'll give one example. I was speaking to someone Thursday night, someone, a number of years older than me. And he remembers when the Mets won the pennant, 1969. So you and I were both a year old, right? So we were still in diapers, right? But anyway, he was telling me he went to the game. They were sitting in the mezzanine section, and he was like a 10-year-old kid, so like 10 years older. And he said, he told his father he wanted to go onto the field. Everyone was like going onto the field. He said, I want to meet the players. And his father says, you don't want to meet the players. That's like the last thing you want to do is meet the players. And he said, and he kept hocking them. He wanted to meet the players. And he said, if you get down there, they're going to be drunk already, right? They're already going to be trashed already. They're like, you're not going to look up to them. You're not going to want to have, anything to do with them, and all that. But, he was stubborn. He wanted to go down, get a piece of the field, whatever. And it is depressing, right? When you see how these people act and what they say. And, I know someone else, great rabbi, told me many years ago, he met some athletes and he said these people were scum of the earth. The way they talk, they're just disgusting people, right? So, there are plenty of people, into sports and, into other things. And they look up to these athletes, but, they're not the greatest. Wouldn't say they're the greatest people by any stretch, to look up to. I'm not going to say everybody across the board, right? I'm not going to make a generalization, but a lot of these athletes, I wouldn't trust them in my house in general. You wouldn't trust them because of any number of reasons. So something like that, we have to know who we're supposed to look up to, and how we're supposed to, again, there seems to be a contrast, right? The contrast is you want to give somebody the greatest chance to be great in Torah. Right. At the same time, you cannot just burn them out as a kid. They have to have outlets. They have, they have to sit and learn. You have to make kosher outlets for them, right, etc. But if you don't, and you slam them, no, oh, this is forbidden. Oh, you can't do that. What are you, a non-Jew? That's what non-Jews do. We don't do that. But the kid needs to know, but he's not doing it. He's not doing it as a rebellion, right? He just needs to get out there for a little bit. Okay, you don't want to organize sports. I understand, right? That could be idolatry, no question about it. But at the same time, if you suppress that and a kid needs it, you will crush them.
Yeah.
You will absolutely destroy them. Yeah, you had a question before?
Well, yeah, Rabbi, I've always been one that believes in strengthening what is a weakness, in any way humanly possible. If you can shore up a weakness, it helps an overall balanced development. But, learning more from the Hebrew people, I mean, you want to be able to train them up in the way that they should go, so their personal skills will flourish. But we here in the 70 nations, aside from COVID, which has been a challenge, especially in the school systems, because in the school systems,
Right.
A lot of them have been shut down. Kids have had a little more leeway. But are you familiar with?
Right.
We're seeing more of this diagnosis of something called Asperger Syndrome. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all. But it almost seems like a cop-out, but yet there is a reality right around everything you're talking about. If you're not familiar, can I read what it says?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, it's known as Asperger's. They call it a neurodevelopmental disorder
Right.
characterized by significant difficulties in social interactions and nonverbal communication, along with restrictive and repetitive patterns of behaviors and interests. And what I've seen, especially here in the West, is many of them become technological dependent. You give them a computer, they're fine. You put them on a tablet, they can work and so, but they become dependent in the sense that they have no ability to interact with others. And there's a real, I don't know if you've heard about it, but I've seen this start to grow in the last 5 years, specifically here in North America, where many, many more children are being developed with it. But I think it has to do with the core of what you're sharing about the honest ethics of actually raising children and strengthening them.
Some of this I would agree is, people have, development issues. They may be very bright as well. They may have some
of them are genius.
Social issues. I know a number of people either outright have Asperger's or they're on the autistic spectrum. Now, I know somebody that, this kid is very, very bright, but when it comes to social interactions, a misfit.
Yeah.
It's totally misfit. And technologically does very well, but he has to go to a school with very small class. Can't put him necessarily in a regular class. Can't, pray with a lot of people. A lot of people just throws them off. It's like autism. They can't be around a lot of people. Technologically though, that may be true, that, that's how they get by, and that's what they need. But, that's not an excuse for social interaction, right? It still has to be worked on, that they have to be able to interact with others. I think in general, certainly in the secular world, right? With COVID came with a lot of issues,
right? A
lot of issues when it came to using technology. Right, in the Orthodox world, right? We'll speak about that for a second. That, a lot of schools had to buy or rent a whole bunch of tablets, get all the garbage off it, so they couldn't go on, the internet, whatever. Only use it for certain things. But what was the problem? When the kids started coming back to school, they were behind. First of all, it's not the same as learning in person. That's for sure. That's for sure. But at the same time, the question for educators, for major educators was, do you do this or do you do nothing? Right? In other words, do the means justify the ends over here? Or do the ends justify the means? In other words, you have to have them learn, in somewhat of a learning, session, whatever. And this is the only way to do it. You put everybody in the class together. You have the rabbi there. Now, obviously it's not ideal. Can't monitor everything since, all the kids are at home and whatnot. It's not, it's not the same. But, the reality was that the learning went down, right? There's no question the learning went down, but you have no choice. So there was a struggle, tremendous struggle. Do we rely on technology for this? And what if we don't? What if we say we're not going to use tablets? Well, then what are they going to do? People can't come to the house. People can't learn with them. So they're stuck learning by themselves, which they're going to get bored. They're not going to be inspired. Yeah, whatever. There are a lot of different issues. There are a lot of different issues. So on the one hand, you need technology, 100%. Otherwise, it'd be 10 times worse, right? But at the same time, even if you get rid of everything, they can't get on the internet. They can't do anything except for Zoom. Zoom made a ton of money. Maybe they're the ones that caused COVID. They made a ton of money over here. With people from work, people working from home and having meetings through Zoom and all that. But in general, caused a lot of issues, right? It definitely caused a lot of issues. And I think even without that, I think adults more than I think kids as well. I think adults are dependent on this like no tomorrow. I mean, I've seen people. I was out and about in Jerusalem last week.
Yeah.
For a couple of days, and you see people with their heads stuck in the phone.
Oh,
they
can walk poles here.
They can walk into walls, for goodness sakes. I saw someone once cross the street too. Cross half the street. Went with the other people crossing the other half of the street. Never looked up. Head was stuck in the phone. Right. So people will jump up and down and say, "Yeah, once a year we disconnect to the internet." What do you mean once a year? People are addicted. Forget about games, forget about videos, forget about they're addicted. This, God forbid, what the joke was. The joke was you have a television, you put it in the hallway and miss, in case you miss a commercial on the way to the bathroom. Someone says, "Oh, Rabbi, you don't have to worry about that. You can put the TV right in the bathroom. You won't have to miss it, right? TV will be right in the bathroom, right? So here you don't even need that."
Wow,
right?
Rabbi, you remember when we were kids, when we were young? You remembered your friends' phone numbers. You had to remember your friends' phone numbers. And you could 10, 20, 50 numbers. Right. Nowadays, they can't remember any. If it's in the phone.
Right. Your wife is speed dial 1, work is speed dial 2, your kid is speed dial 3, right? And then you forget your name. It's like, hey, what's my name?
They don't even type. They have to record everything. Voice apps.
Right. So we'll say that, we are dependent on technology today for a number of things. That is true, but I think people have gone way beyond. Another joke is that, you're sitting around the table, with your family for dinner. Nobody talks. They just text. Can you pass the salt? Can you pass the meat? Can you, it can, I'm not saying it goes that far. I'm not saying it goes that far. There was a story. Someone told the story. They were in a restaurant. And they couldn't get the waitress's attention. So they asked one another waitress, "Hey, what's their phone number?" So they called them up, said, "Yeah, we're sitting at table number 5. Can we get some drinks over here?" It's crazy. I mean, I'm not saying that, that happens. But
it does.
You have to look at what it does. You have to see what it does. It makes people stupid. What's the proof? Anyone who has to write a paper or do anything, what do they do it in Word, right? Most likely they do it in Word or some other type of word processing thing. Whatever it is, they don't have to worry about grammar. Why? Because all of a sudden you're going to have these red lines. Oh, spelled this wrong.
Grammar
this is run on. Oh, this is something else. I didn't have that growing up. I had to look things up in a thesaurus, right? Anyone know what a thesaurus is? Right? Synonyms, antonyms, right? Look up, you got 10 words that say the same thing, right? But here, you can have your own thesaurus built in Word. Right, I don't have to look it up. Maybe I have to go online, right? But it makes us look much brighter, and most people won't know grammar. They won't understand grammar because, again, it's done for them, even if they learn it in school, right? It's a crutch, and people rely on a lot of things in technology as a crutch, which is the problem. People today, and I get this all the time. People ask questions, right? Some of them are more confusing than others, so I can understand, right? They'll ask a question. Right. Otherwise, we'll go to Dr. Rabbi Google, right? Or Rabbi Dr. Google. Okay. right? But people don't want to think. When I was growing up, when we were growing up, there was a statement: 1% think, 4% think they think, 95% rather die than think. People don't think. They don't think. They don't want to think. Comes to crossword puzzles, Sudoku, other things. They get frustrated. They just push it away, right? They don't have patience. It used to, how much patience did a person have? It used to be a commercial back in the day, right? Back in the day, how long was a commercial? Like 6 minutes, right? That was the amount of a person's attention span. Today, the commercials you see, they just flash things at you. Bam, bam,
Yep,
bam, bam.
30 seconds.
Yeah. So even if the commercial is much, is much shorter, people do not have attention span. And the reason they don't have attention span is because their head is stuck in a machine, right? They want things answered like this. When it comes to learning, certainly learning Torah makes a person weak. Why does it make a person weak? Because you have to think, right? So now you got Art Scroll translations, you got other things. Oh, I don't have to think. I look at Art Scroll. Before you look at Art Scroll, right? Now you might have to look at Art Scroll anyway just to understand what the words are, right? But you have to think. It's not enough just to know what the words are. You have to know what it means. Then once you know what it means, what are they arguing about? Then you see what the commentaries say. They take one side, take the other side, take both sides, right? But you have to learn how to think. See, when it comes to Torah learning, imagine, a person been sitting and learning, they take a year off from university, right? Or a couple years off, and they really like delving into learning. Now, no offense to anything in university, whether it's calculus, science, all these other things. I learned liberal arts, so it's a little bit easier, right, in many ways. But even with these other things that are hard, I'm not going to say it's not hard, right? But if you're analyzing a text, these things are a joke. These things are an absolute joke because you have to sit there and analyze. You have to take things apart. It's not about just putting formulas together. It's not about just memorizing things. Someone will say, what do you mean? I went to medical school. You know how hard medical school is? A lot of medical school, no offense, is about memorization. That's what it is. This thing does this. This thing does that. This thing's connected to, knee bone connected to the shin bone connected to the foot bone, right? So, okay, you have to know where things are connected, what things do, what these processes are, what the neuron, all these different things. I'm not saying it's not difficult, right? But at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with memorization, right? It has to do with putting things together and putting things through formulas and how formulas work and what they do, right? See, when I did geometry, I was great up until that point, right? Algebra, fractions, this, that, I could do it in my mind. I got to geometry, seeing things in more than one dimension, it was over, right? Parallelogram, you got, 2 angles, 90-degree angles, and this is like this, and this is like this, and Pythagorean theorem, you put this together, that together. I was lost, right? And man, when I got to calculus, it was worse. You take a sine curve, you flip it, you get a cone. I'm like, I don't see that. I just see a sine curve flip. Where do you get a cone over here? Right? So I had a lot of difficulty. When it came, up until that point, I'm not going to say I was a mathematical genius. Everything came easy. Algebra came easy. Trig to a certain extent came very easy. I got the geometry, stopped. Dead in my tracks. That was like a little bit humility, right? A lot of humility, right? But a lot of that is applying, it's just putting in numbers. Once you know how the formula works, that's a piece of cake. You just have to crunch the numbers, right? So a lot of things that comes to math and science is about crunching information, right? So I learned that by, history. You got to take a lot of information. You have to understand it, but you have to analyze it. You have to see what's behind it, what's going on, what other factors are. Again, I'm not saying everything else, quote unquote is a joke. I don't want to be misquoted here and someone splice it, but no offense, a lot of it has to do with how much I memorize and put things together, right? When it comes to analyzing Torah, it's complicated. A lot of Torah has to do with laws of damages. You know how complicated the laws of damages are? Questions you have to ask, how things apply, it does apply, it doesn't apply, etc. There's a lot going on in the text itself. Now, even if I'm just pointing this out, that even if I understand the text and I understand what it says, so what are they arguing about? Right? What in the world are they arguing about? So I go to Rashi, right? And Rashi says, oh, this is what the text is talking about. You go to Tosfos on the other side, he says, what do you mean? Why does Rashi say what he says? I got an explicit piece of Talmud against him. So before Tosfos gives his answer, now you got to think, why did Rashi say what he said? Right? What is he analyzing over here? Right? In other words, if a person is learning good, in anything they're learning, they should come up with other questions, other great commentaries ask. In other words, we don't just say, okay, what did Tosfos answer? Forget what he answered.
Right.
What would I have thought? What would I have thought over here? What's behind what Rashi says? So you're going to say, well, that's a little bit picayune, and you go into the details, but it's everything over here because according to Jewish law, there may be tremendous ramifications, right? Maybe we throw out Rashi because Tosfos, the other commentators say, Rashi's wrong, and he's wrong for this, that, and this is the practical law. Now, there's another thing going on over here. A person, can go through the commentaries, and this one argues with this one argues with that one. Then you get to the code of Jewish law, it's a different thing. Then you have to analyze, where did he get it from? And why do we hold it like what we do? What about, one of my son-in-laws was telling me today, interesting thing. They're learning something, and they look up, some of my Rebbe's responses, and he says, wow, he says such unbelievable, novel things. He doesn't say anything like the commentaries. In other words, they went through all the early commentators, later commentaries, and he brings out an idea like nobody says like he says, right? Okay, you have to have broad shoulders, right? But something like that, you have to see, okay, how is he learning over here? How is he going against everybody else? This makes the brain tired. People think, you learn all day. Well, you try it. It's taxing on the brain. People want 1 second answers. There are questions I could give a 1 second answer. Somebody asked me a while ago about, life after death. So what do they say? Give me a 30-second answer. Right, a 30-second answer, life after death. So I'm not doing that. I said I'll send you something. You watch a video. I'll send you something. I'm not going to give you a 30-second answer because you're not going to give me 30 seconds. It takes a lot longer to understand and how it works and all that. So, people live in this generation. Everything has to be like fried food. Like fast food. It has to be quick. Give me an answer now. Think. If you get stuck, you're not sure. There are different opinions. You're not sure which way to go. I understand. Right? But, not everything should be spoon-fed. Right? One of the great character traits, of a teacher is they don't give all the answers. Maybe they give some of them. Yeah. Right? I remember, learning under a great rabbi, and, he said it's good. And he told me many times, I have an answer. Think about it. Come up with your own answer. Right? Think, you're on the right track. Or maybe you're not on the right track. Think a different way. Right? But God gave you a brain. I'm not going to spoon feed you. Unless I see you're going in the wrong direction. Now, what do people want? People do not want to think. They just want the answer. That's right? So a lot of my class, when it comes to Jewish law, when it comes to conversion, so I cut to the chase. Right? I'll tell you, okay, according to this case, if this happens, that happens. This is what the halacha is. But this is giving the simple answer. Maybe I'll give a little bit of background, as well. But, it's like, my Rebbe's got 8 books that he wrote of question and answers, all kinds of different topics, all over Torah. When it comes to laws of damages, laws of marriage, laws of divorce, all these things. I asked him once, I said, I don't understand. You give very short answers. You don't give the sources. A lot of times you don't give sources in how you got to the answer. So he looked at me and he said, if I did that, this book would be 15,000 pages and no one's going to read it. What people want in this generation is bottom line. This happened. What's the law?
They want an app.
What do I do? Yeah, I'm going to write a book. Someone keeps asking me where this book is. The answer to everything in Judaism in 30 seconds. Right? How to give a 30-second answer into the most difficult questions in Judaism. One day I may do it. Right? I may actually do it. But what's the point? What's the reason behind all this? The reason is people don't have patience. Now, when people don't have patience, what I've seen also is that there's disrespect. Why do I say there's disrespect? Because I've seen people say, I've seen people ask a question, innocent question, right? They ask an innocent question, and then, so okay, I'll give them an answer. And then they say, hey, but I just got an answer from this rabbi, disagrees. So why are you asking me? If you're gonna, like somebody said, I always say, in my classes, I tell people, you can't suck from two cows, right? Now, what does that mean? My rabbi says you can't suck from two cows. So it means somebody was going to a rabbinical court, and they didn't finish the conversion, and they went to another Orthodox rabbinical court in the middle. In other words, they stopped in the middle, which is a major red flag because rabbinical courts talk, right? So this person came back to me and said, well, I'm stuck here. I burnt my bridges. I said, of course you burnt your bridges. I can't speak to one rabbinical court because they're going to say, why'd the person leave? I can't speak to the other rabbinical court because they're going to say, hey, the person left the first place. True, right? So they come back to me and they say, well, I've asked this rabbi, that rabbi, and the other rabbi, and I want your opinion. I said, that's great. I can watch the hair I don't have on my head grow. I said, you're rabbi shopping. I said, if you're rabbi shopping, don't waste my time. My time is worth it. I'm not going to charge you for answering, but my time is worth something, right? So why does my rabbi say you can't suck from two cows, right? So I always say, there are a lot of great classes out there you can watch on YouTube, but the problem is if you have too many hands in the pot, you get burned. You listen to this rabbi, that rabbi, the other rabbi. There are differences in philosophy, how they look at the land of Israel, other things, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, there are differences. 98% we all agree. But if you're getting your information from 10 different sources, you're going to look scatterbrained. You're going to look like a DVR. You're going to go spinning in all the different directions, right? So I don't mind answering people's questions. That's what I do. It's part of what I do. But for goodness sakes, if you have to be respectful. Say, well, I heard another opinion like this. What do you say? But don't tell me. Don't come out and say, you're wrong because I heard this other thing. So why are you asking me? Why in the world are you asking? If you're asking as a psak, what do I do in this case? Don't bring me 10 other sources. Well, they disagree. Well, thank you very much. Okay, so other people disagree. So what do you want from me? Right, so why are you asking? Right? So go to Rabbi Dr. Google. Oh, I couldn't find an answer. So I went to other people. Okay. Right? But again, be honest when you ask the question. Yeah, you had a question before.
Well, yeah, right around this whole point. I've always understood, and I find this a problem today with a lot of people, the question of oversimplification. Some people honestly believe that an oversimplification is what they want. They want that quick and easy answer. Okay, that's it, and that's going to be my new motto. But in reality, an oversimplification is in fact an error, is it not? You might say a bit of truth, but when you oversimplify it, you've gone in error. And I think the wisdom of the rabbis is to make sure what needs to be transmitted is transmitted in whatever the case is. But so many people aren't looking. It's because they want that oversimplification. They're almost begging for errors.
But sometimes that's all they need. Sometimes that's all they need. If it's more complicated, you can give a bottom line and say, yeah, this is what the law is. You can say there's a caveat that, there are opinions like this, opinions like that. My opinion, is like this. Or as my rabbi would say, this is the way it is. So you don't have to like it. You can say, well, I like the other opinion better. Okay, but the problem is, now I just want to clarify, if you're asking a rabbi a philosophical question, that's one thing. If you're asking a question in psak, and i.e., what do we do in this situation, then you're not allowed to go to someone else. Unless
right, 100%.
This person made an egregious error. They missed a Mishnah. They missed, one of the later commentaries says it's definitely against you, or something like that. But once you ask the question, this is explicit in the code of Jewish law. You cannot go to someone else knowing I'm going to get a better answer. I'm going to get a more lenient answer. That you're not allowed to do. Once you ask the question, that's it. Right? But, if the person missed the boat, if they totally missed the boat, and you got proof they missed the boat, that's one thing. Right? But if you're going to bring up another opinion that disagrees, and the opinion that they gave over is the opinion that they hold of, then you're not allowed to do that, right? You can ask, why do you disagree? I'm not saying you can't ask that, right? But at the same time, you cannot go to somebody else and ask the same question. That is explicit, right? That Talmud speaks out. Certainly that the Code of Jewish Law speaks out. And, to me, personally, I think that's obnoxious. Why are you asking someone the question where you're going to go ask someone else if you don't like the answer? Like I say, I've been close to my Rebbe more than 25 years. I take the stringencies with the leniencies. That's it. I'm not saying I always listen 100%, but that's it. I don't pick and choose. I definitely don't pick and choose. There are people who have their rabbi for kashrus. They have their rabbi for, family purity questions. They have their rabbi. I said, I've been lucky. I have one rabbi for everything. He should be well, because he knows everything about everything. So I don't do anything without asking him, if I'm not sure. So, that I've been very spoiled, but at the same time, I can't ask him a question, get an answer and say, you know what, I'm going elsewhere. I'm going to go ask someone else in their opinion. Can't do that. That 100% is forbidden. If somebody wants to say, why do you hold it like this? There are other rabbis that say like this. What's behind what you said? Okay, right? That's a different issue. But asking what, by going to someone else in the middle, that you're not allowed to do, right? That you're not allowed to do, and that's disrespectful. That is totally disrespectful because you asked this rabbi for his opinion. You specifically asked him for his opinion. If it's something in philosophy, like we mentioned, that's a different story. There can be philosophical disagreements, right? On a number of different things. Now, again, there are certain red lines you can't go against, right? In other words, otherwise you become a heretic. You can't say, well, there's no such thing as reward and punishment. You can't say that. God forbid, there's no such thing as resurrection. I don't believe in resurrection. These things, according to the Rambam, 13 principles of faith, you lose your status as a Jew unless you repent, right? So you have to be within certain parameters. If you're outside those parameters, you're outside, right? So you have to know who these people are, who to stay away from, which, we've mentioned a number of times, but at the same time, even rabbis in the same generation can disagree, right? They can have tremendous disagreements, okay, right? So you say, well, who do I hold like? So that's a good question. In certain things, let's say my Rebbe has said that, he is let's say he's by himself and everyone else disagrees, right? So I will point that out. This is his opinion. Majority opinion goes against him. And in general, you would go according to majority opinion, right? I'll give one example. I called them up. I was in the States, and there's a custom on the 8th day, according to Rev. Elijah Vilna, the Vilna Gaon, of blessed memory, on the 8th day, that on Sukkot, on the holiday of Sukkot, we sit in the Sukkah, but we don't make a blessing on the Sukkah, because it's a doubt. It's a major doubt, for that day. So you're allowed to eat in the Sukkah, but you don't make the blessing over the Sukkah. Now the question is, since we sit in the Sukkah every night, right, if we're able to sleep in the Sukkah, are you able to sleep in the Sukkah on the last day? Right? See, in the last day in Israel, you would never do it because it's not Sukkot anymore. Right? It's Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, all in one day. In America and outside of Israel, anywhere else, you have Shmini Atzeres is the 7th day. The 8th day is Simchas Torah. They have 2 days. Right? We do it all in one day. So in Israel, you're not going to sleep in the Sukkah on the 8th day. Right? But outside of Israel, you could. Right? So now I was in America. So I asked my Rebbe this question. And he said, the Vilna Gaon holds, you're allowed to sleep in the Sukkah. Right? You're allowed to sleep in the Sukkah on the 8th day. Now, everyone else disagrees. Everyone else disagrees with the Vilna Gaon. So I asked my Rebbe, when you were in South Africa, when you were there in Sukkot, what did you do? He said, I held like the Vilna Gaon. I slept in the Sukkah when it didn't rain. Right? If it didn't rain, I slept in the Sukkah. So I said, if you're a student of an 8th generation descendant of the Vilna Gaon, he said, yeah, you can also sleep in the Sukkah. He said, now, I was there 3 years, and I had one time I was able to sleep in the Sukkah on the last day. Why? Because the other days it rained. I wasn't able to sleep in the Sukkah. So people said, nobody holds like that. Nobody holds like that. Nobody sleeps in the Sukkah on the 8th day. I said, not nobody. I said, the Vilna Gaon holds clear. He said, yeah, but nobody holds that way. I said, listen, you go ask your own question to your own rabbi. And if he tells you, you don't sleep in the Sukkah, you don't sleep in the Sukkah. I said, I got a Torah giant. I asked all my questions too. He told me I can sleep in the Sukkah like the Vilna Gaon. You want to disagree? Okay. right? You want to tell me the vast majority of rabbis disagree? Okay, I didn't ask the vast majority. I asked him, right? Because I ask him everything. If I were to ask a rabbi in the community, what would he tell me? You don't sleep in the sukkah, right? That's what he told me. But I didn't ask him, right? So now you have to know when you're able to do that, when you're not able to do that, etc. It takes wisdom, right? It takes learning, it takes wisdom, it takes a lot of other things. But for goodness sakes, you don't pick and choose. If someone has a rabbi that can ask all the questions to, it's a major bonus. Major bonus, right? But, if you ask somebody the question, this is really the point, is that if you ask somebody the question specifically about Jewish law, do not rabbi shop. That's forbidden. That 100% is forbidden. Now I say, what about a non-Jew? Maybe it doesn't apply to a non-Jew, but you shouldn't do it anyway.
No.
Right? Just consider it.
Form.
And if you're going to do it, I would say even as a non-Jew, if you're going to do it, which really shouldn't be an issue, but if you're going to do it, to not come back to the original rabbi, certainly don't come back to me, and say, well, I got five other opinions disagree with you. Okay, very good. Right? As a Jew, you can't do that. Right? If you're asking a specific question, if you're asking in general, what's the law? And a person says, well, it's a difference of opinion. Majority says like this, minority like that, or whatever. It's one thing. That's something else. But, you have to show a certain level of respect. I just think it's a total disrespect over here, where people are going to say, well, I don't like that. I don't like that answer. All right, find another answer. But if it's Jewish law and that's what the law is,
right?
So
right,
you find people
clear.
Disagree, fine. Then if no one disagrees, great. If people disagree, so then you got to figure out which side you're going to be on. But if you're asking a rabbi who holds according to one side, don't go to someone else who holds according to the other side. Just because you want a more lenient opinion, that you're not allowed to do. Right? That is forbidden according to Jewish law, and which makes sense is because it's disrespectful. Right? That is disrespectful. So when it comes to education in general, which we've been speaking about, it's a hard topic. It's a very hard topic. Every generation, let's make clear, every generation has its evil inclination. Right? And in the early 1900s, we had the rise of communism. You had the rise of socialism. You also had the Industrial Revolution and all that. But there were many, many tens of thousands of Jews that were taken away from Judaism because of philosophy, right? Because of these other isms. The Rambam, when he was alive, he wrote a book called The Guide for the Perplexed. The Guide for the Perplexed, very hard book to go through. It was written in Arabic, in a very philosophical language, then translated to Hebrew, which is even more difficult, and then translated into English. And it's all about basically trying to find answers to the different mitzvahs of why we do what we do. But in general, it was to answer Jews were going astray because of Plato, Aristotle, and all that. Now, that book today, nobody reads. Just about nobody reads today. Why? Because it doesn't have any relevance today. Because it's not about philosophy. I haven't met too many philosophers. I haven't met too many big thinkers in the world. It's all about desire. They all want to justify 100%, what they do. But the Rambam's not in vogue today, right? That book is not in vogue today. So in his generation, it was all about Plato, Aristotle, right? In this generation, right? In the generation of the early 1900s, right? What was the plague that was going on? Was communism, was socialism, right? You got tens of thousands, millions of Russians wiped off the face of the map spiritually, right? Because they grew up in an atheist place and they weren't allowed to keep anything. So they got destroyed. So democracy, today has destroyed the vast majority, of Jews, certainly in the States and in Europe. Been absolute disaster, not to mention the other so-called Jewish movements, that are out there, which we've spoken about. So that being the case, this generation, what's the main thing that's ripping, Judaism apart besides intermarriage and assimilation, and that's technology. Technology today, 100% probably the major factor in schools that the kids go astray. They see things they shouldn't. They get caught up in things. Right now, included in technology, I am going to throw in there sports. I mean, not CFL, but sports, real sports, right? Sports, entertainment, movies, any of these things. Because it's a lot easier to be a couch potato than to actually want to sit and learn. Playing video games. How many times have I seen, people say, oh, they're playing this game. Candy Crush, this, that, these things are addicting. Now, when we were growing up, what was the big thing? Donkey Kong, asteroids, right? Going to hyperspace, Pac-Man, Pac-Woman or whatever. The Pac, I forget what they call it. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
It Miss Pac, whatever it is, right? So, that was the thing. And I remember when these, computers came out, you had more memory in a phone, right? Throwing that in the first computers and all that. But video games are addicting. They're tremendously addicting. I know someone actually told me recently they run they're a manager of I guess a bar, a bar that has like a lot of video entertainment. Probably billiards, what they call here in Israel snooker, billiards as we would call it, video games, etc. That stuff is still going to sell. Why? Kids are going to enjoy it. It's addicting. It's totally addicting. So that by itself, Jew or non-Jew, person gets involved in that, and it's enjoyable. It passes time. You don't have to think. It's a lot of fun, and it destroys the mind. Right? Forget about drugs, other things. This absolutely destroys the mind because learning a piece of Talmud is a heck of a lot more difficult than sitting watching a movie for an hour and a half. It could be a tearjerker, it could be, Rambo, it could be anything. Whatever it is, it's 10 times more enjoyable because I don't have to think, right? I'm not learning Musar. I'm not learning Jewish philosophy. I'm not worrying that I should feel like a piece of dirt for all the time I waste, right? And think about what's going to be in the next world and trying to understand what's going on, but you're still a kid, right? So, as a kid, it's hard to explain this is negative. This is going to have such a negative effect, right? They don't see that until it affects them. But the problem is, what do they say, right? What's the old statement you remember way back when? Curiosity killed the cat, right? Yeah. So if you tell somebody, this is forbidden, don't go near it, it's a Pandora's box, all that, what are they going to do? Yep. They're going to open it. They're going to open it. Now, if you say, it's not really exciting, it's a waste of time, whatever. When I was in camp many years ago, I had a camper, tell me that you have to experience everything, right? At some point, you have to experience everything in life. How are you going to know things if you don't experience it, right? So I had a very easy existential answer. And my answer was, I don't think that's true. I said, why not? I said, well, if I were to tell you, go outside the bunk, right? Go past this tree, it's about 60 feet, 100 meters. Now, run as fast as you can into the wall of the bunk. He says, I'm not going to do that. I said, why not? He said, you said you have to try everything. So now that's different. He said, that would break every bone in my body. Oh. So if I know something is bad for me, physically or spiritually, then I shouldn't do it. I should stay away from it. But it's tempting. Doesn't evil inclination say, come on, this family watches these things, someone else does this, etc. So why not? Because when you open up a Pandora's box, it's very hard to close. Mm-hmm. And these things make it very, very hard for kids to be able to learn, right? Someone once told me that, if they're learning with someone, they can tell they're very keen in this, that they can tell if someone has watched something the night before. They can tell because of the concentration.
Right.
I mean, that takes wisdom. That takes a lot of wisdom to be able to see that. Maybe not. I could be wrong. But if a person's like spacing out and like thinking about other things, then obviously something else is going on, right? Now, is that fun? Yes. Is it enjoyable? Yes. Is it educational? That's debatable. That's extremely debatable. But I can tell you, there's a whole tirade while we're on this topic. What about cartoons? Are cartoons problematic? Yeah. Now I grew up, Elmer Fudd. I grew up with Tom and Jerry. right? Gonna age
Bugs
myself
Bunny.
here a little bit. Grew up with Underdog, Bullwinkle,
The Flintstones.
Tasha Burnout, like all these things,
Scooby
right?
Doo.
They're all, this was before, and I had a whole, a lot of fun in the 80s with Beavis and Butthead. I don't remember if you remember Beavis and Butthead, but you're talking, or Itchy and Scratchy. I mean, these things are violence. I mean,
The
you probably didn't
Simpsons,
watch the
yeah.
Three Stooges either, even though
Family Guy.
slapstick is even though slapstick is hilarious, nonetheless. I mean, not everyone likes the Stooges, but I grew up on the Stooges, So in any case,
Beautiful.
these things are extremely violent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Wile E. Coyote going after Roadrunner, beep beep, and he keeps dying. He keeps getting blown up, and he just keeps coming back. But what's the whole point? He wants to kill him, right? Elmer Fudd, right? What he wants to, I'm gonna kill that rabbit. I'm gonna destroy that rabbit, right? It's violence. Forget about movies. You got Rambo, you got the Avengers, you got all these things. All these things that are inherently violent. I remember years ago there was a kid. Tragically, they took out another kid in their class and they killed him. They killed him because they wanted to feel what death was like. Now, what happened right before that, or shortly before that? They watched the movie 1,000 Faces of Death. Oh. So now they wanted to experience what it was. Yeah. They wanted to see what it's like, to kill someone. I mean, you ever watch The Goonies? They want to see a dead body. That was like in the late in the early 80s or whatever. So like these things are interesting, right? But there were all these reports, that said, well, there's too much violence. There's way too much violence, and kids act on this violence. Well, of course they do, right? I heard people say that. I heard a great rabbi once say that in Israel, in Israel, they didn't have too many stations way back when, before cable here, many, many years ago, right? Talking, let's say, more than 40 years ago. And what was the big thing? Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was the big thing. So everyone wanted to be like Bruce Lee, and people chopping each other and kicking each other and
kung fu fighting,
and all that. We do what we see. We don't necessarily always act on what we see. But the problem is what we see has an effect on our psyche, right? Now, we mentioned way back when, right, probably in the last millennium when we spoke about this, and we've spoken about it a few times, and the fact is when a person thinks something, it becomes part of their psyche, right? So we mentioned about Julian Edelman, call him out again, right, with this basketball player, and he says, I'm going to teach him about anti-Semitism and how bad it is and blah, 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 right? But this guy doesn't have an excuse for what he said, because if we're going to say that whatever a person thinks it's now part of their psyche, I didn't mean to say that. It's already part of your psyche, right? But what we see, now, a person sees, an Avengers movie. They see, other types of movies where they're embellishing things that should never be embellished. Crime, drugs, immorality. I mean, there are very few things that a person can see, even if it's rated G, that everything's going to be positive, that all the values are going to be positive, because it's not.
Of course.
But not only that, person will say, come on, I'm not going to act that way. I'm not going to do anything to anyone, like that, but it becomes part of you, right? It becomes part of your psyche. Now, when you see all these images, imagine, now you tell your kid, is watch this, is watch that, is watch the other thing. Okay, time to learn Pirkei Avos. Right? Time to learn Gemara over here. Let's go. You have 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Let's go. Playing games. It's hard to stop. It's very hard to stop. Right? Because you're shooting baskets, you're killing people, you're, whatever it is, maybe it's not so violent, maybe it's a race car game, whatever, but all these things end up doing the same thing. Right? They weaken your ability to want to think. They weaken your ability to want to work. That's what it does. That's essentially what it does. Some more, some less. Now, even if somebody, somebody has a phone, right? On that phone, you can do all kinds of things. No different than a computer, right? You can do all kinds of things. The problem is, if people would look at their day, even when they have to work 10 hours, or 8 hours or whatever it is, how many videos did they watch during the day? I'm not saying movies. I'm saying, there was a terrorist attack, they go watch. something on the news, something, God forbid, you give us 10 minutes, we'll give you the world. Same news over and over again, right? But maybe something's going to be different. Maybe I missed something. Why are we all caught up in this? Because we want to escape reality. That's essentially what we want to do. We want to live in Never Never Land. You say, what do you mean? I'm just following the news.
Fantasy.
But if you were to ask somebody, in the last 10 years, you've been following the news day in and day out, what'd you learn? What benefit did you get out of doing that? You're going to see man's inhumanity to man. And it may be Jews, maybe Orthodox Jews as well. It doesn't really matter, right? But you're seeing the same stuff just in a different place or even in the same place. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, right? We always have to ask ourselves, day in and day out, okay, what do I set out to accomplish? What am I going to do today? Right? And then at the end of the day, did I accomplish? Didn't I accomplish? Right? Before a person goes to sleep, they have to take stock of what they've done. Right? So I always say, you don't have to worry about the month before Elul to take stock of your life. If you've been taking notes every day of your life, sometimes more, sometimes less, what did I do? What didn't I do? What do I have to work on? You know where you stand. And, and sometimes it's very hard to look in the mirror. That is very true. But we have to be honest, because at the end of the day, we're living in the Messianic era. We just saw something that can flare up, and all kinds of things happen over nothing, right? Essentially over nothing. The world is a powder keg waiting to be destroyed, essentially, right? God forbid. So we don't know how long we're here for. We saw before that a person has to repent at least a day before they die because you want to die with repentance. But obvious question is, nobody knows when they're going to die. Very good. Mm-hmm. Right? King David says that we're here for 70 years. If we have strength, we're here for 80 years. When a person hits a certain age, he's got to start thinking about the next world. Marva Rebbe told me one of the first times I met him, and he was like in his late 60s or early 70s. And he once told me, he said, I'm already living, I'm already in the ground. I'm already preparing for the next world. I'm like, say what? And he goes, when you hit a certain age, you got to start thinking about the next world. Sure. You got to think about, your time in this world is coming to a close, right? But the problem is, someone watches, say, I'm going to live forever. Forget it. You're not going to live forever, right? But you got to take stock. You got to take stock of what you're doing on a daily basis, right? So I thought to myself, when, my Rebbe said this, I was like, who in the world speaks like that? Who in the world speaks like that today? Torah giants do, right? Great spiritual individuals do. Why do they do it? Because they're living in this world. Because they know how the world works. They know every time you take a step backwards and you sin, it's like taking 3 steps backwards, right? It's a lot harder to get to where you were before, right? So if a person's doing the same thing over and over and over again, the evil inclination says, oh, this is easy. All I have to do is just rev it up every so often. And then he's going to sin, right? And then maybe he'll do something worse, right? That's what the evil inclination wants. But we have to sit there and fight it tooth and nail. And it's not an easy thing, right? Because there are a lot of things that are enjoyable, right? There are plenty of things that are enjoyable. Sports, entertainment, they're enjoyable. Entertainment may be a little bit tear-jerking here and there, right? But it's enjoyable, right? No one's not going to say it's not enjoyable. At the same time, we have to ask ourselves, is this good for me or it's bad for me? And if it's bad for me, I have to stay away from it. But the problem is I've already tasted what's forbidden. Once you've already tasted the forbidden fruits, right, that's a lot more difficult, right? As King Solomon says, I think in Proverbs, he says, Maim genuvim im taku. He says, stolen waters are most sweet. Yeah. Meaning that when a person's married, it doesn't mean that, they don't desire the opposite sex, right? It doesn't mean that. But, someone, God forbid, is not in a good marriage, stolen waters are always sweeter. Why is it always sweeter? Right? Because it's something you can't have, right? And so imagine, a person, okay, I'm gonna take this other person, get rid of their spouse, and guess what? It's not going to be as rosy as you thought. Why not? One very simple reason, because when you can't have it, it's sweeter. Now that I have it, okay, it's good. I'm not going to say it's bad, but it's not as sweet as it once was. right? It definitely is not as sweet, right? So any of these other things, we don't have to go to that example, right? But any of these other things that are enjoyable, that are fun, etc., to sit there and do the right thing and overcome that, that's very hard, right? That's extremely hard. So this generation, I don't think there's any question. This generation, the thing that people fight against most, is technology, right? And that's why the rabbis have been screaming, about the internet and video games and other things,
Wisely said.
for the last 20 years, for the last 30 years. It used to be, what were they screaming about? TV, right? And, and watching video. Now it's 10 times worse because all I have to do is get a handheld device. Once I have a handheld device, I can do anything as long as there's Wi-Fi.
Yeah, no 5G
right?
networks.
And that is 10 times worse. It used to be, person wanted to, look at something immoral. So, okay, you had to go to a place to do it, and you might be embarrassed or whatever, but you had to at least go to a place to do it, right? Here, I don't have to go anywhere. I can do it in the privacy of my own home, right? I can do it anywhere. So, technology today, certainly in the Orthodox world, is extremely problematic. So then people on the other side of the fence will say, they should be able to control themselves, control their thoughts. These are young people, right? I told someone, a while ago, they have younger kids. I said, well, do you filter what they watch, on TV? And they said, I'm aware more or less. I was like, what do you mean more or less? I said, how do you decide? You're playing with a Pandora's box. Definitely a Pandora's box. Say, well, they're gonna see this stuff anyway. They understand this stuff anyway. So like, what's the big deal? The problem is when you put 100% garbage on that soul, whether you're a Jew or a non-Jew, it's much, much harder in order to overcome that. Because once a person starts doing something, again, we've mentioned this many times, once a person starts doing something once, twice, the third time, it's part of your psyche. Once it's part of your psyche, even if God didn't wire you that way, what's going to happen? It's 10 times harder to fight, right? Because it's part of us. Now, I could say, let me do this or let me do that. And like Adam said, every time I overcome my evil inclination, so my good inclination goes up plus infinity. But the problem is if I do the wrong thing, I bring my soul down and my body down plus infinity as well. So Adam did have a point, right? That we could reach a higher spiritual level in a much quicker time. The only problem is God didn't create the world for that. Not only that, God calls him a heretic, the Talmud tells us. Because God says, even if I understand what you're saying is true, which even if I may agree, that's not what I wanted the world for. I didn't create the world for that, but okay, because you did this, now I have to change. Now the world has to change. You have to go through death, there's suffering, there's other things, right? But that's not what I wanted the world for. And even if I agree, and even if I say you're right, the repercussions are 10 times worse. Why? Because if a person goes, does not go down the straight and narrow path, and at least fighting these other forces, they just say, well, this is the way I am. This is what I do. You don't like it, or God doesn't like it, well, it's too bad. I enjoy doing this, I'm not going to stop. What does that do? Right? What that does is it destroys the soul. That's essentially what it does, because it destroys the soul. You are going to put 100% more muck and muck and muck on that soul. So that means you're going to need a snorkel in order to breathe, because you're going to be so underwater, right? It's kind of like you're being suffocated to death, with all this negativity. So you're going to say, but doesn't Torah push away a lot of negativity? It does. That certainly does, right? The problem is if you're not focused on Torah and you're focused on that even more than Torah, then Torah cannot have that power unless a person is going to be disciplined. So this world that we live in, this transient world, we 100% have to be disciplined. If we're not disciplined and we just say, well, anything goes, I'm going to see what I want, I'm going to do what I want, it affects me negatively, it doesn't affect me negatively, it doesn't really matter. And the point is that's not true, right? Because what you're doing is you're making your life a heck of a lot worse. You're making it that much more difficult to fight, in spiritual terms. Doesn't mean you can't, right? Well, I'm going to say, well, If I've done this and I've done that, you're telling me I can't fix it. I didn't say you can't fix it. What I'm saying is it's that much more difficult to fix. I'm sure that, God forbid, the people that abuse alcohol or drugs or anything else, they didn't start off by drinking a 6-pack, in 35 seconds. That's not how they started. They didn't start off, smoking, one puff and that's it, right? Or whatever. They didn't start in big numbers. What happened was it just exasperated over time, right? It went further over time. It became greater over time. So even if a person started out innocently, quote unquote, what happened? It overcame them, right? It overtook their life and it destroyed them, right? Because most people, when it comes to either alcohol abuse or drug abuse, the only way they understand they have a problem is when they lose something, or they lose everything, right? Rabbi Dr. Twersky of blessed memory wrote a number of books about abuse, a tremendous psychiatrist, right? No question about it. And, that was his conclusion, over years of, having all these patients, that a patient can only hear they have an issue. Gambling, no different, right? When they lose everything. Now, someone's going to say, listen, if they have an addiction, not so bad, right? They have a movie addiction. They have an internet addiction. They have a sports addiction, right? So you're going to say, well, these things will not necessarily destroy a marriage. Now, that depends, right? It depends how far it goes, right? But there are, a number of people. I mean, the numbers are probably staggering, but I'm sure there are a number, the number of people, that have got divorced based on people they met online, right? Either, social media, other things, and it could have started very innocently, very, very innocently. Someone had a need, someone provided a need, whatever, and, in the frum world, in the ultra-Orthodox world, has destroyed marriages. Absolutely destroyed marriages. So, on the one hand, everyone will say we need it. Yeah, you need it for business, you need it for other things. Okay, but you are playing with a Pandora's box. Yeah. Certainly a friend of mine would say no one's ever been a Torah giant by being on the internet. All right, that may be true. There's probably a lot of truth to that.
By being where, Rabbi?
And no Torah giant has ever been a Torah giant by being on the internet. In other words, if they spend a lot of time on the internet, they can't be a Torah giant, right? Why? Because that time's being wasted when they could be learning, right? So the idea is if we would take apart our day in general of how much we spent on spirituality and how much we spent on other things that are, let's say, detrimental to spirituality, I think we'd be shocked. I think we would be very much shocked, right? And if you want to see where you're absolutely holding, take stock of this, because then you'll see. Then you'll see what it does. And then what it can do and what it has the ability to do is get us addicted. And once it gets us addicted, any addiction, doesn't matter what it is, any addiction is hard to fight against. Someone, even if their sports team is not doing well, they're looking at other teams. They're watching other highlights, different things, right? That, because that's just what they enjoy. And, it can spiral totally out of control. That, they can stay up till all hours of the night watching things, seeing things, who knows, right? So that is a serious, it's a serious thing. Where just in religious terms, when it comes to Torah and when it comes to learning, this is totally detrimental. It's detrimental because we get bad values from this. It's detrimental because we don't think the way we should, etc. It's bad, right? It's bad across the board. Forget about, the athletes and the actors and actresses and all that. We're not getting good values from this. We're not. I'm not saying we're not being entertained, right? No one's gonna say we're not being entertained, right? Good values, yeah. You got to show me. You got to show me all the good values of all these athletes, and what they do. Yeah, question.
Okay, this is a bit of a big one, but it kind of covers the gambit of everything you've been sharing today. I think If I think back, I mean, because I know you're quite a historian. If I think back and I look at human growth or development in civilization, there's been epochs or eras where there's been like the Renaissance and just major leaps. And I know that the hope, especially amongst all God-fearing people, is that Mashiach now. And so one thing I've noticed, though, Rabbi, is that before, say, the Renaissance, before any great revolution of human developmental explosion, there's been a growth with the Hebrew people in the sense of a developmental stage just prior. Like I know, like when you go back to the time of Rashi and Rambam, shortly thereafter, you've got the development of the printing press, which send the world into an entire different universe of development. Right. We know that, the 90s, when the internet was just coming out, was called the information age.
Right.
We know that we're hoping for this growth of Mashiach now, but I think the balance of what you're talking about, the ethics, the morals, the character has to be there without the negative element, and we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater because
you're right. The problem. Let me tell you what the problem is. The problem is people will say, "Listen, I got the Torah mitzvahs through videos." Through videos on YouTube, right? Now that's true.
Yeah, we even had that comment on Facebook today.
Yeah, I'm not going to say there's not a lot of good, right? There are a lot of good Torah sites, orthodoxconversion.com, my site that's back up, right? There's a lot, starting to put more stuff up there, but
beautiful.
There is a lot of good things if you have to be on the internet. What I'm saying is that I would say the bad outweighs the good. Right now,
of course.
Someone's gonna say, come on, that's a little bit radical to say.
Well, there's more coal than diamonds.
I'm gonna tell you, if a person goes on to YouTube, right? If a person goes on to YouTube, they have even if they have their own channel, they go on to YouTube, they're gonna see things that are suggested, unless they turn it all off. Right now, some of the things that they're seeing being suggested, I would say relatively innocent. Right? Some of them. I would say the vast majority
algorithm marketing
of things that you're going to see, you shouldn't see. Right? Even if you don't click on them, you've already seen the caption. You've already seen the picture. Right? So you got to be very careful over here. I'm saying that, if there's a way to go on without seeing all this other stuff, I would agree. Right? But you can't. You're right. You can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? But what I'm saying is that people don't make, they don't make barriers over here,
right?
In other words,
the fencing idea.
In other words, they'll say, okay, I'm going to be careful, right? I'm going to really be careful. What I see, what I look at. So I'm not going to take a show of hands, but I would ask the following question. A very simple question.
Right. How
many times a day does a person, when they're on the internet, let's say they're looking at things on Facebook, whatever it is, how many times a day do they see something that's inappropriate? Once? Twice? 5 times? Come on, am I getting warm? Probably higher than that.
Yeah.
It's probably higher than that. Because if a person goes into their spam folder, even if you weren't on sites that are bad, person gets spammed all the time, right? With all kinds of things. So I would say in general, if a person, let's say, and I'm going to be generous. I'm going to be overly generous because I like you and I like doing this. I'm going to be overly generous and say, let's say it's 20 times. 20 times during the day. You have been shown or you have seen at least a snippet or something of something you shouldn't have seen. Right? Over a week, 5 days a week, let's say, that's 100. Over a month, that's 400. Over a year, that's 5,000. Right? Again, I said 20. I was being generous.
Well, we become
I think it's a lot higher than. So now Rabbi Dr. Dan over here hit the $1 million word. So what's the problem? You're gonna say, come on, someone once told me if you go to the beach, i.e. a mixed beach, And you as a guy don't get excited, and you get excited, there's a problem with you. So I said, unless I'm a eunuch, right? Unless I'm a eunuch, then there's something, there'd be something wrong with the person. That's a normal reaction. Oh, you have to control it. It's a very strong urge. Yeah, that's all true. Not to control my thoughts as well, right? That's all very true, right? But the problem is, the more we see, right? That's really what I want to get to, is that the more we see violence, immorality, cursing, and all that, we 100% become desensitized. Once you become desensitized, how much Torah is going to overthrow that and be able to overcome that? It's very hard. I had someone once tell me they were addicted to video games. I hope they're not now. And they said, how can it be, even if they have ADHD, how can it be that, they get all distracted listening to a video, even if it's like a half an hour, 45-minute video, but playing video games is a lot easier. I was like, I don't understand the question. Of course that's the case. Playing video games, you don't have to think. Playing video games are fun. It's fantasy. Thinking about Torah, ethics, wanting to change, it's a heck of a lot more difficult, right? It is a lot more difficult. So the more I become desensitized, the harder it is for me to strive and reach my potential, right? That is the reality. Because the person can say, yeah, I've seen this thing 100 times, right? I've seen these different things 100 times. It doesn't affect me. That is not true, right? Doesn't really matter. So a person will say, well, I've seen this image, doesn't do anything for me. Then either you're lying, which is probably true, right? Or you are so desensitized. You're so desensitized to it, you don't even know what it does to your soul. Right? In other words, a person, if they see certain things, they should be screaming out of their skin because it's so bad. Right? What they see, what they hear, they should be going absolutely ballistic. Like my rabbi says, if you see someone desecrate Shabbos, a Jew, you see them desecrate Shabbos, it doesn't affect you, you're spiritually dead. Didn't exactly say that, but he said that means Shabbos is not that important to you. Why? You're going to say the person doesn't know anything. I wish him good Shabbos, and all that. But you see someone desecrate Shabbos. Someone who desecrates Shabbos in public, right? They have the status as a Jew. They have the status of a non-Jew, right? Shabbos is not that important to them. They don't care. They disagree that God created the world. Because Friday night, got up to make Kiddush, right? You say that Friday night, you say the chapter 2 in the book of Genesis, God finished creating. It's all about creation of the world. You don't make Kiddush Friday nights, right? You deny that God runs the world. So you deny God, right? Essentially. So person walks by, seeing someone desecrate Shabbos, the first thing you should do is scream out. But obviously you're not going to do that, right? It's not going to bring a person closer to Judaism. At the same time, within yourself, you should be screaming out because it's a desecration of God's name. Because they don't care about God. They don't care He created the world. They don't care about anything. They're busy mowing their lawn. They don't think they're doing anything wrong. Right? But if a person sees it and it doesn't affect them, he said, then there's a problem with their observance of Shabbos. That means spiritually there's something wrong with their soul. You're going to say, I can't change the person will never listen. Irrelevant. Right? Irrelevant. A person sees something where the person should be killed. They should be taken. They should be warned. They should be killed. We don't have a temple in Jerusalem. So they say, wow, he's so cruel. Judaism is so cruel. No, there are certain things that get the death penalty, right? It comes to immorality. A lot of things by immorality, death penalty. Now, we don't have a death penalty today, but we should be screaming out. It's a desecration of God's name, what goes on. Total desecration of God's name. Even if the person's not going to listen, we have to scream to ourselves. Because if we don't scream to ourselves, what happens? Rabbi says clear, others say the same thing. We become, as Rabbi Dr. Dan said, we become desensitized. 100% desensitized. Once you become desensitized, it's hard to turn that back on. Why? Because it's a normal occurrence. We don't see what happens to them. Right? We don't see what happens to them. We don't see God taking over here. And a person can say, what's going on? Why is this person allowed to mow their lawn? Right? They're not. So why doesn't God take care of them? Because we mentioned before, we mentioned before that if I say, God, you're not doing your job over here, that's heresy. Because in one of the paragraphs of the Shemon Esrei, of the silent meditation, we say that God should bring back, we should see God's judgment clearly in this world. Now, if a person says, someone caused me damage, right? Someone caused me damage, and you pray that God takes care of them, there are two things going on over here, right? One thing is, you're right, you're in pain, right? And this person, God should judge, and take care. It doesn't mean they have to die, but they should pay a price. They should pay a price. But what happens? The Talmud tells us, you want something bad to happen to this person, or in general, you want God to do judgment with this person, your file gets opened first. Now, you're going to tell me why is that fair? And it's not, in general, I would say it's not fair, right? The only time you ever want your files open is on Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, everybody's files open. Jews, non-Jews, God's going to judge us for the next year, right? What we did the previous year, what he's going to give us the next year unless we repent, right? That's the only time you want your file open. Your file open. You don't want it open any other time during the year. Now, the question is, why? Now, so again, now you have to think, right? So the Talmud tells me that your file is going to be open first. Why? You got to ask the question, why? What did I do? I want God to take care of this person who caused me damage, right? So God says, you're right. Caused you damage. So what does Mr. S do? Mr. S says, oh, look, this person over here wants you to call out somebody else for the damage they caused. I said, okay. So what does Mr. S say? Mr. S says, let's see where this person's holding first. In other words, Ruvain prays to God and says, I want you to take care of Shimon over here. I want him to suffer because of the suffering he caused me. Right, so Mr. S says, God, let's see where Ruvain's holding. Is Ruvain such a big tzaddik? Is Ruvain so righteous over here that we're going to give him a free pass? So then they start looking into his deeds. Now, who's going to pass this test? Who's going to pass this ultimate test? So that's one issue. The second issue is you're a heretic. Why are you a heretic? You're a heretic because you want God to do judgment. You say, God, Ruvain says, I want you to take care of Shimon for the damage he caused me. God looks down and he says, yeah, Shimon actually caused you damage. Right? Now, you might have deserved it. Doesn't really matter. Right? But he has to be punished. You're right. God has to take care of business over here. So what are we saying? What are we saying? We're saying God's not taking care of business. Right? That's heresy. That's absolute heresy. Because essentially, we're saying God's not doing his job. So, in general, I can say, we pray that God should take care of our enemies, right? So we have physical enemies, take care of my spiritual enemies, right, as well. But if a person has someone specific in mind, your file gets opened first because you're looked at as a heretic because you're looked at as saying God's not doing his job. Now, someone could say, but that's not fair. That person caused you damage. You're right. So let's take it a step further. Someone caused us damage. We have to realize, says the Avos, right? It says in duties of the heart in the gate of faith in God. What does he bring down? He brings down anything that happens to us. You want to say someone was texting, ran a red light, smashed into our car. Didn't cause us physical damage, smashed into our car. Right? Now, you're a little bit shaken up. You go over there. What's the first thing you do? You start yelling and screaming. Says the Avos, that's not what you should be doing. You should be there hugging the person, giving you the opportunity to work on your belief in God. You're going to say, what are you kidding? You expect me to be superhuman? Everybody in their right mind is going to be cursing this person because they saw them texting. Right? They went through a stop sign. Avos says, but don't you realize? God is just using this person as a stick against you. You did something wrong. You deserve to have property of yours damaged. So what did God do? I use this schmendrick over here. I use this person to text, go through the red light, the stop sign, and hit your car, cause you damage.
Boom.
But you're going to say, wait a minute, that person also has to be punished. God says, don't worry about it. I'll take care of them. But this is something you had coming to you. Whether you deserved it now, whether this is what your soul has to go through, for whatever reason. Right? There could be a million different reasons. But he says that the mentality has to be, and he doesn't say this is for the righteous. He's saying this is for everybody. When that person damages your car, you just had it shined. You just had it waxed. The car's only a couple years old. Never be the same, right? Probably never be the same afterwards, right? But what happened? What happened? God's sending you a message. He's sending you a direct message. He gave you a message before you didn't get it, right? He did something, far away from you. You didn't get the message. Now he has to do a little bit close. He has to damage. He has to take money out of your pocket. If that doesn't work, then God has to damage your body as well, right? If we don't get the message. But the Jewish mentality is, in the proper Jewish outlook, is that God is doing this for me. This person's just a stick. So why am I yelling at the stick? Because that's what we do. We yell at the stick, but isn't God just using the person as a stick? Just like a dog. God forbid you hit a dog with the stick, the dog goes after the stick, not the one wielding the power. So comes along, God says, I'm using the person as a stick. If I'm using the person as a stick, why are you getting upset at the stick? Different than the dog, right? And he says that's for everybody. Now, you, Rabbi Dr. Dan, are going to say, or someone's going to ask, come on, nobody's holding that way. Nobody's holding that way today. Most Jews, most Orthodox Jews. What's the first thing they're going to do? You got insurance? You better have insurance. They're going to sue you for negligence. They're going to jump up and down and yell and scream. Right now, I'm not saying they don't have a right to be angry. Right? The Avos will take issue. The Avos over here will say, you don't have a right over here. You're right, you got shaken up. You know why I got shaken up? Because you were stupid. Because you did things you should never have done. Ever! As we would say in Boston. You should never have done it. But now I have to teach you a lesson. Right? A father says to his child, well, this is going to hurt me a lot more. It's going to hurt you. Etc. I have to discipline you. Right? Now, the child may call the police on you. Different issue. Right? But they have to be disciplined. Now, the discipline has to fit the crime. What they've done. If you discipline out of anger, you can't do that in education. You have to discipline with the discipline that fits the crime. Right? In that way, the kid hopefully will get the message.
Right.
God's trying to do the same thing. Whenever we are punished, God forbid, it's measure for measure. Now, we have to try and understand what the measure for measure is. I heard someone say last week, we had two things here in Israel. There were 45 people killed in Meron. People trampled each other to death. And a week later, in another community, it was a similar thing. It was a brand new, thing that they put together, right? Brand new bleachers also collapsed. It wasn't something old that they said, oh, this was going to happen. It was brand new, right? So a friend of mine said, obviously we are trampling on other people. We are stepping on other people, right? Measure for measure. You step on other people, as an Orthodox Jew, God's going to say, I'm going to meet this out measure for measure. You're going to say, but I'm trying to do this, trying to do that. Yeah, but if we look deep into ourselves, be kind of depressing. That's why most people are on Prozac. Most people are depressed today because they have no meaning in life, right? But if we really think deep in our souls and what we're doing in the world in general, don't we walk on others when we shouldn't? Don't we say things when we shouldn't? You're going to say, Rabbi, I don't understand. You say, the Torah says I can't take revenge, right? The Torah says that, I have to be nice to others. The Torah says a lot of things. But really, does the Torah really want me to uphold the standard? Well, who do you think it's talking to? It's not just talking to the righteous. Somebody, we'll give an example. Someone's backyard is like a jungle, right? They need to borrow someone's lawnmower. So Reuven goes to Shimon, can I borrow your lawnmower? And Shimon says no. Doesn't give a reason. He just says no, you can't borrow it. Right? So, he gets his own lawnmower or borrows someone else, whatever the case is. And, months later, or a week later, 2 weeks later, whatever, Shimon comes to Reuven. He has a lawnmower. Reuven now got a lawnmower. Shimon comes to Reuven and he says, can I borrow your lawnmower? Comes along Reuven and says, what do you mean? I asked you to borrow your lawnmower. You said, no, I'm not letting you borrow my lawnmower. Now, the only reason it would be permissible to do this is if Shimon ruins things. If he's got a reputation, he's going to ruin your thing, I don't have to lend it to him. But if Reuven would tell Shimon, he says, I'm not going to be like you. I'm not going to lend you my lawnmower because you didn't lend me your lawnmower. Well, guess what? That's a Torah prohibition of taking revenge. So now you say, come on, he's upset. This person didn't lend him his lawnmower in his need, right? When he needed it. Now, does that person have a right to be upset? I would say he's got a right to be upset. He needed the lawnmower. Now, Shimon could have given 100 reasons why I didn't want to lend the lawnmower. It doesn't really matter. Reuven's still upset. But if Reuven says, I'll never lend you my lawnmower because you wouldn't lend it to me, that's a total prohibition. Now, he might be justified in some ways, right? But if he's not justified, he really should give it to him. That's forbidden, right? That is taking revenge. So the question is, come on, at what level do I have to live by these laws, right? How far does it go? That's how far it goes. You know, I had a case where many years ago, where there were still like payphones and stuff. They had, you wanted to call the state, you had these like coins that would take like 50 coins to speak for like 2 minutes or whatever. So, one day I was calling my parents. I was talking on a Sunday, and there was someone there waiting for the phone. I've told the story before. And eventually the person said, "You're on the phone way too long." He hung up. He just hung up the phone. He said, "Get out of here. I need to use the phone." What did he need to use the phone for? No, it was in Israel. So what did this person need the phone for? He calls up the owner of the pizza store, this is where the phone was, right in front of the pizza store. And he calls up this guy in the pizza store, and he says, "Come on, we're hungry. You got to get down here and open up the store." That was more important than me talking to my parents. Yeah. Now imagine, I go back to learn. This person comes in, and he says, "Can I borrow your pen? Do you have a pen I can borrow?" Now, if I have a pen that works, and I'm not worried this person's going to damage it, I have to give him the pen. I'm not allowed to say, "You stupid moron," right? You went against Coffman's 615th commandment of don't be a moron, right? I'm never giving you your pen. Look what you did to me. If I would say that, it's a total prohibition. I may be justified. I can 100% be justified with what the person did. It was obnoxious what the person did. True. But if he comes to borrow a pen, or he asks me for something and I have the ability to help him, or her, or whoever it is, right? And I don't, because I say I would never do that in my mind, I'm not going to help you. Why would I help you? No, I don't have a pen, but this is a pen sitting right there, right? Or let's say there's not a pen there, but I know I have one, or I know where to get one. And I blow him off and say, "No, I don't have one." Right? Now, if deep down, God sees that I'm not doing that, I'm not giving it to him, or I'm not helping him because of what the person did, that's a total prohibition of taking revenge. Now, most people would say, I may be justified. 100% you may be justified, but you know what? That's not what the Torah says. That's not what that is not what I'm supposed to do. I don't care why the person did it. It's irrelevant why the person did it. Maybe God just put this person in my path in order to work on anger, right? Maybe that was the reason. Could very well be. Doesn't mean you're still not ticked off, but that's what the Torah says. The Torah says I'm not allowed to do it. So the question really is that really what God wants? Right? And the answer is yes. I would say maybe taking revenge for a non-Jew doesn't apply. Maybe if he wants, he can take revenge, right? But it's not good for you.
Still a moral imperative.
It may make you feel good because you just nailed somebody because let's just say they deserve it, right? But deep down in your heart, it's not good for your psyche, right? It would be what I would call a law, for the Noahide laws, it's a moral imperative, right? Not necessarily an obligation. So if it's not necessarily an obligation, why should I do it? Because it benefits your heart. It gets rid of anger, right? It makes you a better person, but it makes you overcome things. Look, you look the other way because you know what? By Yom Kippur, if I look the other way at what someone else did to me, and they come and ask for forgiveness, and I really don't want to forgive them, right? But I look the other way, and deep down in my heart, I'm 100% able to forgive them. God's going to overlook what I've done against him. Now, is this going to be an easy thing? Never. The hardest things are the things we get the most reward for, right? If I had someone who stole my money, who's not in this world anymore, but if he would have begged for forgiveness, and he really meant it, which he never did, but if he would have done that, that would have made me the most righteous of this generation, or one of the most righteous, because that's a very hard thing to do. Extremely hard thing to do, especially when my life's been upside down for the last 17 years, in a lot of different ways. So that would have, I'm not saying it would have made me the most righteous, but it would have been a very, very hard thing to do. Thank God I wasn't put to that test. I would have failed. I would have absolutely failed. Why? Because I don't believe he meant it, right? I wouldn't have believed for a second the person meant it, because he never did it over that time. But even so, let's say got on his hands and knees, and many times over time begged for forgiveness. I don't want to go out, I don't want to go in the next world. I don't want to have to suffer because of this, and all that. And this person, God will take care of them. I have no doubt about it. But that would have been something that would have been so difficult to do. So, God never puts a person in a situation they can't handle. This I could tell you, in my own life, if this person would have come to me and he really would have meant it, I wouldn't have been able to do it. It's not something I would have been able to do. And God could have taken me to task and said, after 120 years, you could have. You could have ripped up, 1.5 million sins that you did in your lifetime by just accepting what the person did. Just accepting this person was a stick. But I'm human. We're all human, right? And someone would say, how could God put someone to, put them through such a test? It's a hard test, right? It's a very, very hard test. There's no question. But if God thought you were able to do it and you didn't, it's held against you. But imagine. I can only imagine. Again, it wouldn't have happened. I would not have been able to do it psychologically. No matter how much psychological help I would have gotten, right? But I don't think I would have been able to do it. I'm pretty sure I would have been able to do it. But imagine if God would have shown me an image. He said, listen, you deserve this, you deserve that punishment, other punishment. This could have taken away 50 million sins, 50,000 sins, whatever it is. You could have come into the next world with a clean slate. Imagine what you could have done. Maybe that would have been an act that would have been so great. That would have brought the Messiah closer. And I still would have said I can't do it. Even with all that, right? It just makes it so hard to do, right? And again, we're human. How far does God take that? I'm glad I didn't have that choice. I'm glad I was not given that that scenario, because I would have failed it. I absolutely would have failed it, and I think most people probably would have failed it also, right? But there are great people out there. There are stories. These 45 people that died, and in their last breath, they said, I forgive the people that are squishing me. People heard this. They said, I forgive the people who are jumping on me, probably going to kill me right now. Who thinks like that? Who's able to think of it, right before they die? They think such a thing. These are great people. Right. These are absolutely great people. They're going to forgive someone for squishing them like a grape. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. They can't help it. They're being squished by other people. But to have the mindset that they're going to accept anyone who's doing it so they don't get punished for it. It's not their fault. It wasn't their fault, but they got thrown by other people, by this thing collapsing. So there are people who can reach high, unbelievable spiritual levels even in the face of terrible things. Right? And there are other people that can't. That is just, it's too hard. I'll give you another, at least an inspiring story. That during the war in 1967, where Jerusalem was being bombarded with bombs and all that, there were a lot of people in a bomb shelter. And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz said there's a woman there. There was a woman there who was being held hostage by her husband who wouldn't give a bill of divorce. Right? And I'm not going to go into it now, but the man has to give the bill of divorce. Otherwise, a woman can't get divorced. Otherwise, she's called a chained woman.
Right.
And this woman screamed out to God and says, I forgive him. I forgive him for all the pain he's caused me. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, he was the Rosh Yeshiva of Mir, of the Mir Yeshiva, 40, 50 years ago. And he said, because of that woman, we were saved. How does someone have that perseverance? How does someone have that mind of thought, when the chips are down, and things really look bad, to say that her life's been turned upside down by, in my language, by a schlep, by someone who never ever should hold a woman hostage because of this, et cetera. It's just spite. All it is spite over here. And she says, with all the pain you caused me, with all the pain, guess what? I forgive you. Says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, that's why we were saved. Not because of our collective merit. This woman, she sealed the day. She was able to save all of us, just by that, because she's given up so much. She has suffered so much. They're going to say, come on. Is that how everyone should be? In theory, doesn't matter what's happened to us. We have to have the ability to forgive. And if we don't forgive, we hold it up inside. Every psychologist will tell you it's bad. But does God really expect I should be at that level? We're not all there. We're not all holding there, right? But I want to point out.
Not there yet.
I want to point out the greatness of man, what we have the ability to do. You think this woman had an easy life? No. But the fact, in her deep of heart, in her heart of heart, she was able to accept the abuse that her husband gave her, without giving a bill of divorce. Imagine the decrees that ripped up in heaven. Can't imagine the power of that. Whatever this woman had to go through, and everything else, that could have ripped up thousands and thousands of decrees that God could have put on the Jewish people by the work of by these words by this righteous woman. We can't imagine. Imagine in certain things in our own lives. I guarantee if God would show us at some level, what we could do and what it would do. Now, it may be very difficult to do. Not going to say not. At the same time, God's never going to put us in a situation we can't handle, even if we think we can't. But I'm just saying, God's going to say, look at my creation over here. He's going to tell the angels, you thought, we agreed maybe man shouldn't have been created. But look at these great individuals. Look at these decrees. Now I'm just going to rip up to shreds because someone's willing to take on this banner. Imagine what that does. We can't imagine. I mean, who knows? If I would have, in the heart of my heart, would have been able to accept what this person had done, maybe Mashiach would be here quicker. Maybe. That just means we're human, and we don't live our lives the way we should. Because the reality is we're looking at the stick. And that's only the stick. And if it's only a stick, don't I realize it's all because of what I've done? But you're still, you're going through it. And life is hard and all that. That's all true. Right? That is all very true. But imagine what it could do to our soul if we're able to do that. And again, I'm not going to say it's an easy thing. It's not. But we have to start somewhere. The bottom line is we have to understand. Right? We have to understand what our obligation is. Once we understand what our obligation is, doing it, maybe a totally different issue. Right? But, we have to know where we're holding. We have to know where we're, what the starting point is. And the Torah is the starting point. Not taking revenge. You think it's an easy thing? No. We want to see people be punished. We want God to take care of business. Didn't I think in my deep, my heart of hearts, God's take care of this guy? I'll take care of him. Right? I have no doubt. In the next world, he's in big trouble. Right? He's going to be in serious trouble. But what do we see as flesh and blood? We see as flesh and blood. We want things taken care of now. We want someone to suffer now. They don't have to suffer as much, whatever, but we want to see something's being done. Because if we don't see anything being done, this is why, this is the age-old question, why the righteous suffer and why evil people have it easy. Don't think God's not going to take care of business. God will take care of business, but I'm suffering. I'm suffering now. I suffered for years. That's all true. Question is how I view it. What the what the mentality is. And I asked my rabbi this also. Right before this person died, I said, am I allowed to put out cakes and stuff, make a blessing, have a little bit of schnapps, a little bit of wine? I'll bring it in. we'll make L'chaim together. And he said, no. He said, that's not the Jewish way. I said, okay, I was just checking. I said, not even a little bit of whiskey, something. He said, no. And the reason's very simple. The reason is because God will take care of business, right? Even though we say when it comes to Jews, if they fall, I'm not allowed to rejoice. Non-Jews is a different issue, right? But a Jew, if a Jew falls and they get punished or whatever, we're not whistling Dixie over here, right? Because it's sad, right? It's definitely sad. So God can be happy and sad at the same time. He can be happy that the Jews get saved, let's say by Egypt, but he can be sad at the same time because his creation's being drowned. And the Jews and the angels, they want to sing praise to God. He said, I can't sing praise to me. They deserve to be punished, 100%, the Egyptians. But they're my creation. I also feel sad at the same time. What would we say? Kill him! Burn him! Right? Of course. Right? And the fact that they say their God is fighting against us, they deserve to be buried, which I mentioned before. The Medrash says, why do they deserve to be buried? I would say let the fish eat them like Bin Laden. Dump them overboard, they die, that's it. Let the fish eat them. No, but they had a merit. God says they had a merit. What was the merit? The merit was they agreed that God is fighting against them. And because of that, no matter what they did to the Jewish people, they deserve to be buried. And if I was there, I would have said, you're absolutely off your cotton picking head. That would have been me. I would have said, God, no offense, I think you're wrong over here. They deserve to be punished. They deserve to be punished. They deserve to be eaten by fish, right? Or whales, other things. I don't care. Let their bodies be eaten. And God says, what are you talking about? They praised me over here. They understood. They got the message finally. They deserve to be buried. Any one of us would have said, you kidding? We would have said, you're out of your mind, right? But God looks at the world in a different way. He gives us the ability to tap in. Problem is, we have to put our mentality aside, and we have to take the mentality of the Torah. And taking the mentality of the Torah, putting it inside of us is much, much more difficult, but that's our obligation. Everyone at their level, but God's speaking to everybody. Even if it's hard, even if it's difficult, it doesn't matter. This is the mentality we have to live by. Is it easy? We didn't say it's easy. We said that's your obligation, right? And we could go through difficult things, not understand, whatever, but we have to look around and understand where it comes from, right? And a lot of it is done because we've done things, right? There are things that will be punished because our soul has to go through it, true, right? That is definitely true. But there are many things we did to ourselves. So God's now just going to use sticks and other things to get back at us because we haven't done what he said. Now, again, living with this mentality is a whole different world, right? If we understand how the world works, which I mentioned many times, then anything that happens, we're okay with. We should be able to deal with. Why? Because we understand how it works. Now, there are many things we don't understand at all, right? Many, many things we don't understand at all. And we have to go on with life. But at the same time, we have to work at putting that part of our mentality. Once we put that part of our mentality and we work at it and work at it and work at it, that's how we're able to survive as Torah Jews, or as non-Jews going in the Torah way. But God, make no mistake, it's not easy, right? This is a lifetime of work. We're all in training. We're definitely all in training, and we're all in training to do what God wants us to the best of our ability, and to reach our potential. Now, we have to do certain things to reach the minimal level. That's all true, but we're going to be tested tremendously. And in the generation before the Messiah comes, we're going to be tested unbelievably, right? But our mentality is God runs the world. God, the one's in charge. My rabbi said many times throughout Corona, that has to be our mentality. That has to be the mantra, and we have to say it a number of times during the day. God, you're the one in charge. I'm nothing, right? I'm just going through the motions. But you're the one in charge. You'll do whatever you feel is right. I have to try and become better. You have to, try and help me become better, overcome my evil inclination. That's what we need to do. But we have to let God do what he needs to do also.
Well said, Rabbi. Well said. So are we going to wind it down for today? I mean, we've gone over a couple hours, and I don't have a broadcast today, or even next week.
We are going to wind it down. There is going to be next week a part 6.
There
we
you
are
go.
definitely in part 6 because we didn't get to the next part of the Mishnah, which I don't even know if next week we're going to get there because we're still cranking away over here. But a number of things I think, at least by education, and how to look at other things, when it comes to things that distract us, especially about technology, I think we're crucial to get out. And I think, as I saw by the chat, a lot of people, definitely enjoyed it. I don't think this is, anything new, but it's looking at it from a perspective where, we need to see it as Jews, as Jew wannabes, or even as non-Jews, and how these things affect us and what we have to do to fight against it.
Yeah. Use it for what it should be used for. I mean, let's face it. From my understanding, the word to be a sanctified, like Hashem has called the Jewish people to be holy. What that really means is doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I heard the analogy sometime somebody shared with me about a pencil. You could clean your ear with it, but it's not designed for that, right? You can stir your coffee with it, but it's not designed for that, right? When you're writing with the pencil, it's sanctified, it's holy, it's technically doing what it's designed to do. And I think just because of the plethora of possibilities, we get so lost. And unless the Torah had clarified, how else are we going to know? And unless the rabbis share with us, how else are we going to know? Trial and error, trial and error, trial and error.
Someone,
we're getting so sick of trial and error.
There's someone who asks, makes me wonder how we're supposed to react to terror and terror attacks.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to bring that up. I think it was Sandra.
If we look and we're living in the Messianic era, this is what's supposed to be. Right? It's supposed to get a heck of a lot worse before it gets better.
Right.
But we have to understand that every missile has its mark. Now, my rabbi said also that, there were more than 4,000 rockets that were shot. Now, there were a bunch that had direct hits. Right? But the vast majority, there were 430 or something that went off in Gaza itself, killed its own people. Right? A number of its own people. And a lot of them were taken down by the Iron Dome, right? But the others that caused damage, right? They hit houses, they hit buildings. Forget about the riots. The Arabs attacking Jews, and all that. A person has to realize, living in the Holy Land, the Arabs, all they need is an excuse, to want to kill Jews, right? That's what their mentality is. Some will want to live in peace. The vast majority don't. The vast majority not interested. Or maybe if you say even if it's a minority, it doesn't really matter. They're the ones calling the shots. As it is, God's saying, well, obviously you didn't get the message when it came to Corona, right? Obviously people dying around you, and being sick, we were spared, a lot of it, here in Israel. But there are a lot of Orthodox Jews that were killed, that died, and certainly, we didn't get the message that way either. So if we don't get the message in the way that we should, so it's going to come out other ways, right? And if God wants, he's now going to put the fear of God in us because, a siren goes off, you have no idea where this thing's going to hit. It could hit 20 miles away. It could hit in your street, could hit a house, especially those that are closer by. We don't know. We absolutely don't know, right? But if we're not getting the message in general, in the palace of the king, he says, oh, you're not really afraid? So I'm gonna stick these dogs on you. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have them in different cities just cause absolute havoc, right? Because you're not getting the message. Now, ultimately, we don't know why these things happen, right? That's the real answer. Ultimately, we don't know, right? But in the end, especially if we're in the palace of the king and we're not doing what we're supposed to do in the palace of the king, there's payback. When, where, how can come it can come in many ways, right? But the fact that, you're living with this threat, right? Especially people living very close, to Gaza, you got Ashkelon, you got Ashdod, you got all these places, very close, within 10 miles, 5 kilometers. They're very, very close. These missiles can hit Tel Aviv, which is much further away. So, and hit central Israel as well. So 70% of the people in Israel are under attack. I don't know if you understand that. 70%. Israel's a small country. Doesn't matter. But imagine up until, let's say, New Mexico, and you go all the way up and all the way to the east, 70% of the U.S. was under attack. No one would stand for that. Nobody. They would sit there, blow these people out of the water. It's not just like, a small group of people under attack. 70% of the country is under attack. So that being the case, Jews in general are not doing what they're supposed to do because it's collective punishment, but all the more so when it happens in the palace of the king. When it happens in the palace of the king, and again, it's the greatest amount of Torah learning is in the palace of the king. Greatest amount of immorality and other things, right? Because if you have good things going on, you have to offset it, right? You have to offset it with other things, right? With other negative things, right? So this is something that, God is putting not only a watchdog, I would say like a bulldog, a pit bull, right? A rabid pit bull. Remember Cujo? A rabid pit bull. Right, Stephen King fame. Right, a rabid pit bull over here, and that rabid pit bull can get excited and jump up and down at any time. When is it going to happen again? I mean, we are in a ceasefire, so to speak. When could it come up again? Anytime. They don't need any excuses. They'll regroup, they'll restock, they'll this, they'll that, whatever it is. But is it ever going to end? And I mentioned my Q&A last week. When is it going to end? It'll only end when they go in the ground. If they do a ground offensive, they just have to flatten the place like a pancake. That's it. And all the places, I'm sure, are booby-trapped. And tens of thousands, God forbid, of Israelis will die. It'll be like another Vietnam. They'll never do it. Not only won't they do it for that reason, because of world opinion. They absolutely won't, do it because of world opinion. But that's the only way to really stop it. Right? That is really the only way. And no one in their right mind is going to admit it. Certainly not America, not anybody else, because they don't understand the mentality. They don't understand, And how did this all start, by the way? It started with a group in East Jerusalem that overtook land that was never theirs. So it comes on the Supreme Court, which has never had any good decisions, always against Orthodox Jews. This is the one thing they got right. And they threw them off. They said they have to get off. They're living there for free. And that's what it started. Now, they didn't have a right to the land. So what are they jumping up and down about? Oh, we don't hold by the Supreme Court. We don't hold by this. We don't hold by that. Forget it. You got thrown off. You get thrown off by, because you took the land illegally. So what are you arguing about? What are you fighting about? Because it's just an excuse. 100%. 100% is just an excuse over here. So they don't need very many excuses to fight. So when does God throw them at us? When obviously we're doing things that are wrong. Obviously, when, God says, okay, doesn't seem like you're afraid of anything. 45 righteous people die in Meron. You didn't get that message. Another 2 die a week later, get trampled to death. You didn't get that message. Right? So obviously, I have to put fear in you. You don't seem to have any fear over here. Right? You don't have any fear. So what does God do? He uses them as a stick. Right? But the problem is, my rabbi said, there are a lot of miracles over here. Once we say it's a miracle, right? Once we say that it's a miracle, then we're more obligated, right? In other words, a lot of these missiles ended up destroyed by the Iron Dome. A lot of them blew up in Gaza itself. And others, most of them hit open areas. Most of them. There are some that hit direct, killed some people. Okay, right? The vast, 4,000, right? So you take how many percentage, 20, 30% the Iron Dome knocked out. You got the other 400, 500 that, Gaza, and the rest ended up in open areas. Only a few got hit directly. That's pretty darn miraculous. But Rebbe says if you say it's miraculous, there's obligation. What's the obligation? The obligation is I understand that God's working behind the scenes here. Right? God's taking care of business over here. Problem is, you didn't change. You didn't do anything to change. So why is God doing these miracles in the first place? So it says, Moreover, Rebbe, if you don't get the message this way, it's going to come back 10 times greater next time. Because you didn't get the message now. You know, and the irony of all ironies, as I mentioned, that the single greatest lie after Christianity is the fact there's such a thing as a Palestinian people. They don't exist. They never exist. In the time of the Ottomans, they never existed. The time of the British, they never existed. All these other things.
Yeah.
But we're passing off the same lie that the Jews created, the Israelis created, with the help of the UN, and all that. Imagine the AP says, oh, gee, we didn't know we're in the same building as Hamas. Really? People showed evidence the last 5-6 years. They knew absolutely what's going on in that building, right? So the AP and all the other journalistic groups, we had no idea. Yeah, they're all lying. They're being exposed. How many people sees that real information? So it's a propaganda war where we're never going to win because the Arabs are the biggest liars in the world, right? Yep. They're absolutely the biggest liars in the world. So that being the case, it's a hard war to fight against. At the same time, God's just using them as a stick against us, right? It could be to get the whole world up, the powder keg for the Messiah to come. It could be just preparation, okay? But you don't want to have to live in fear. And unfortunately, in the Messianic era, that's what's going to happen. It's going to get a heck of a lot worse before it gets better. So a friend of mine said, told me last week, so let the Messiah come now. Let it all just go. Let this war, to end all wars go. And, let's see what's going to be. But there's a ceasefire now. We'll see how far. Yeah. We'll see how far. How long it's gonna stick. And all that. And if things go back to normal. But again, we cannot go back to normal. That's the whole point, right? We have to realize that God's sending us a message. And what's the message? We collectively, as a Jewish people, we have to be better. You're right. We have to get out there. We have to show the lies. What they're doing, and all that. But look what's going on, in America and other places in the world. You got Arabs attacking Jews all over the place. There are fights all over the place. What's going on. It's, again, the world of powder keg. And of course, whose fault is it? It's ours. We're in the land of Israel. We're going to fight against you. We believe in BDS. We're going to fight against you. Why? This is what's supposed to be. And this is what's supposed to be for all, for all generations until the Messiah comes, right? It's going to culminate with the Messiah coming. So sometimes it flares up more, sometimes it flares up less. Bottom line is, it's all about us. It's all about what we do, right? And if we're not doing the right thing, God's going to put a pit bull against us, right? The Gemara says that when the Messiah comes, it comes one in two ways. One way is we do the right thing, we bring the Messiah in a peaceful way. The other way is God puts up a king like Haman, like Mr. Haman himself, and we repent through, we repent that way, because we're terrified. So it looks like the second way it's going to come, not the first way. I could be wrong, but that's the way we need fear over here. We don't have proper fear of God. And only the people going through it, everyone else, it doesn't really affect them so much, right? Because they're not living in Israel, but they're being affected in other ways. Anyone looking openly Jewish, they're getting attacked. These Arabs go to a sushi restaurant, in LA. Say, hey, any Jews here? Say, yeah, we're Jewish. Bam, 30 of them come out of a van, start attacking them. I mean, it's crazy. Absolutely nuts. You saw a pro-Palestinian rally in New York. A bunch of Jews there got attacked. I mean, it was crazy. It's crazy what's going on. Anti-Semitism at an all-time high. But again, if it's a powder keg ready to happen, and this is going to bring the Messiah, we still have to live, we still have to survive, we still have to keep God's commandments and do the mitzvahs, right? But, God wants us to be afraid over here, right? And we should.
Reverend, for sure.
And if we don't get the message, if we're not getting the message by now, we're pretty dead. We're pretty dead spiritually. And God said, okay, look at all these things I did. Okay, I'll make a ceasefire now. 4,000 rockets, a few people woke up. Very good. What do you think is going to be in the future? It's going to be 10 times worse. Right? It's going to restart.
Well, I'm praying for you.
Everybody's praying. That's good. We have to change. We have to get the message. And if we don't get the message and we say it's a miracle, like my rabbi said, if we say it's an outright miracle and we're living in miraculous times, no question, but it doesn't get us to change, and our heart is still hard as a rock, and we're still doing the same stupid things, God says, why did I do these miracles for? What in the world was the point? Right? What in the world is the point? Why did I do it? He's going to make it worse. So that's the answer. we don't know essentially why. We can probably guess. We can probably guess, what the sins are, whatever. We may be right, maybe wrong, right? It doesn't really matter, right? The point is, God's telling you you're not okay, and I have to put the fear of God in you because you don't get it. You're just not getting it. There's sickness, disease. There are all kinds of things going on, and people still don't wake up. People still want to go back to life as normal. Come on, aren't most stadiums going to be full in the next few weeks? In sports, going to go back to normal, right? COVID's dead. We beat it. No, all right. So listen, in Boston, in the next couple of weeks, they're going to be opening up stadiums, for everybody. Some other places as well, going back to normal. But going back to normal means that I get the message. And if I didn't get the message, God's going to say I wasted my time. What do I waste my time for? Yeah. Right. So that's the message. We have to be stronger. We have to be better. We have to take stock. At the very least, that's what we have to do. We have to make an effort to change. Because if we don't, and we just go through the motions again and again and again, it's a waste of time. Right? God's going to say, what am I doing over here? Right? It's okay. Back to the pit bull. You guys obviously didn't get the message over here. We're going to use the pit bull now. Right? Nobody wants it. Right? And we have to pray. It doesn't happen. We have to pray. We're better and all that. But, the reality is we're our own worst enemy. And it's for us to get the message. And if we don't get the message, this is what happens. God sends pit bulls against us, and it'll bring about more anti-Semitism and all these things. So now we get the message. Right? Now, does God want to do that? No. He doesn't want to have to do that. But there are sometimes, just like a parent has to punish a child, which we spoke about, so too God has to punish us. And he has to do it in this way. But he doesn't want to have to do that. Right? He certainly doesn't want to have to do that. But, my rabbi would say also, I have to be better. I still have to pray. I still have to keep mitzvahs. I still have to do what I need to do. You let God take care of what he needs to do, and you put your best foot forward. That's what we have to do, and that's the message.
Well, as long as we're being the best we can be out here with the 70 nations, I know the standard is so high for the Jewish people. But Rabbi, you're so encouraging. So, shall we wind it down at that?
Yeah, that I would say is a wrap.
All right. So, folks, we're going to aim for the same time next week. It'll be a half hour later than our usual time because Shabbat sunset there in Israel. I so appreciate hearing the Light of Torah today. It was an awesome session with Rabbi Coffman, live from Israel, sharing the ethics of the Father. So, till next week, folks, we're going to sign off. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.